Before we begin tonight's story, if you're enjoying this content, using your hype points on this video helps the channel more than you possibly know. It makes a real difference in getting these stories out to more people. If you're listening on Spotify, leaving a review helps out tremendously as well. And if you feel like it, drop a comment letting us know what time it is where you are and where in the world you're tuning in from. We absolutely love seeing where everyone is listening. And of course, if you enjoy these deep dives into the unexplained, hit that subscribe button. Now, let's get into tonight's story. The Dark Forest File. The cursor blinked on my screen at 2:17 in the morning. Outside the window of the government contractor facility, Washington slept under a blanket of sodium lights and paranoia. I was 3 years into a job that had slowly eroded my faith in transparency, cataloguing declassified documents that should have stayed buried. The facility itself was unremarkable, a converted office building in Arlington, the kind of place you walk past 1,000 times without noticing. No signs, no guards at the entrance, just a plain door with a card reader and cameras that watched everyone who entered. Inside, rows of cubicles filled with people like me, contractors with security clearances and non-disclosure agreements. We processed the aftermath of government secrets, the paper trail of decisions made in rooms we would never enter. Most nights were tedious. Agricultural reports from the 1960s, diplomatic cables about long-dead regimes, budget allocations for programs that went nowhere. I had catalogued entire filing cabinets of mundane government waste, thousands of pages that proved bureaucracy was just as boring classified as it was public. But then there were nights like this. Nights when a single folder made me question everything I thought I understood about our place in the cosmos. Nights when I realised that sometimes things are classified not because they are dangerous, but because they are terrifying. The folder was thin, unmarked except for a label that read, Fermi, closed discussion, redacted. Inside, a single sheet of paper, typed, no letterhead, just a question, where is everybody? Below it, in what appeared to be a different typewriter, a response, do not pursue this line of inquiry further, and stamped across both, in faded red ink, classified, eyes only. I should have logged it and moved on. That was the protocol. But something about the desperation in that response, the urgency in the stamp, made me dig deeper. What I found in the attached files would change how I looked at the night sky forever. This is the story of why the universe is silent, and why that silence might be the only thing keeping us alive. Chapter 1. The Question That Triggered Alarm Bells. The summer of 1950 was supposed to be a time of scientific optimism. The war was over. America was building the bomb and dreaming of the stars. At Los Alamos National Laboratory in New Mexico, some of the brightest minds in physics gathered to push humanity forward. Enrico Fermi was among them, Italian-born, Nobel Prize winner, one of the architects of the atomic age. He was known for his ability to reduce complex problems to simple questions. On a July afternoon, during lunch with colleagues Edward Teller, Herbert York and Emil Konopinski, Fermi posed one of those questions. The group had been discussing recent reports of UFO sightings, joking about flying saucers and alien visitors. The conversation was light-hearted, theoretical, the kind of thing brilliant minds engage in when they need a break from weapons research. The file contained a partial transcript, reconstructed from memory by York years later, declassified only because everyone involved was dead. Teller had apparently made a joke about little green men. Konopinski laughed about the recent sightings over New Mexico, the usual banter, scientists mocking the public's credulity. Then Fermi went quiet. According to the declassified notes, he stared at his sandwich for nearly a full minute before speaking. York's account described the moment. Enrico had this way of going still when he was calculating something, like he had left the room mentally. We kept talking, but I noticed he was not listening anymore. He was thinking. When Fermi finally spoke, his voice was different, not joking, not light. Where is everybody? His colleagues laughed. They understood immediately. He was talking about aliens, extraterrestrial civilizations. the statistical probability that in a galaxy with hundreds of billions of stars, Earth should not be alone. But Fermi did not laugh with them. York's transcript continues. We expected him to smile, to join the joke, but he just kept staring at the table. Then he started calculating out loud. The calculation was simple, elegant, the kind of back-of-the-napkin math Fermi was famous for. The galaxy is approximately 13 billion years old. Stars with planets have existed for billions of years before Earth formed. Even if intelligent life is rare, even if only 1 in a million star systems develop civilization, there should be thousands of them, millions of years older than us, and a civilization even a few thousand years more advanced than humanity would be visible, obvious, unavoidable. York's account. Herbert said something like, "Maybe they're just too far away." Enrico shook his head. He said, "At 1% the speed of light, you could colonize the galaxy in a few million years. That is nothing. Galactic timescales. Where are they?" The laughter stopped. What the public knows is that this became the Fermi paradox, a philosophical puzzle discussed in university classrooms and science documentaries. The contradiction between the high probability of alien life and the complete absence of evidence for it. What the public does not know is what happened next. According to the file, Fermi's question triggered something. Within 48 hours, he was pulled into a closed-door meeting with military intelligence. No record of the meeting exists in official channels, but the file I held contained handwritten minutes, initialed by someone whose signature had been redacted. The notes were fragmentary, rushed. But the theme was clear. Fermi's question was not abstract. It was tactical. If intelligent life is common in the universe, if the conditions for civilization arise frequently, if millions of years of evolutionary head start exist for countless species across the galaxy, then something should already be here. Some signal, some artifact, some trace of expansion. The absence was not just puzzling, it was alarming. One note read, "Fermi suggests 3 possibilities. 1. We are first. 2. We are rare. 3. Something prevents arrival." Another note in different handwriting, "Option 3 requires immediate assessment." A third note, this one in red pen, "If something prevents arrival, what prevents it? And would it prevent us?" The meeting concluded with a recommendation that the question be contained to theoretical circles, and that public speculation be discouraged. Fermi was asked, according to the notes, to refrain from publishing on this topic. He agreed. The Fermi paradox entered public consciousness anyway, but always as a puzzle, a curiosity, never as a warning. But in the file, someone had written in the margin of those meeting notes, in handwriting that looked hurried and afraid, "He knows, and now we do too." Chapter 2. Early signals that were never public. The next section of the file contained radio logs, dozens of them, dating from the early 1950s through the late 1960s. They came from various facilities, Greenbank in West Virginia, Arecibo in Puerto Rico, classified military listening stations whose locations were redacted. I am not an astronomer. I am a file clerk with a security clearance, but even I could see the pattern. The logs documented anomalies, not the spectacular kind, not the "we found aliens" kind. These were subtler, stranger, more disturbing, repeating periods of structured silence, frequencies that should have shown cosmic background noise instead showing nothing, as if someone had muted specific channels. One detailed report from Greenbank, dated March 1956, described an observation session targeting Tau Ceti, a sun-like star 12 light-years away. The astronomers expected normal background radiation, random noise, the chaos of cosmic static. Instead, for 6 hours they recorded perfect silence on a specific frequency band. Not low noise, not reduced signal, complete absence, as if a wall had been placed between Earth and that particular region of space. The lead observer noted, "Instrumentation checked 3 times, calibration confirmed, pointed antenna at different targets. Normal noise resumed. Return to original coordinates. Silence returned. No equipment malfunction can explain this pattern. The observation was repeated 2 nights later. Normal cosmic background noise. The silence was gone. Signal cut-offs. Mid-transmission readings that simply stopped. No fade-out. No degradation. Just absence. As if a switch had been thrown. A log from Arecibo, October 1962, documented a received signal at 1420 MHz, the hydrogen line, the frequency astronomers call the universal channel because any technological civilization would monitor it. The signal showed structure, repeating pulses, not natural. The team locked onto it, recording frantically. Duration, 11 minutes, then nothing. The signal did not fade, did not drift in frequency, did not degrade. It stopped, mid-pulse, as if someone had ended a transmission. Attempts to relocate the signal, unsuccessful. Attempts to determine origin point, inconclusive. The direction suggested a region between known star systems, empty space. The report concluded, source unknown, nature unknown, repetition attempt scheduled. The next log entry, 3 weeks later. Follow-up observation negative, no signal detected, region shows baseline noise only. Dead zones in space, regions where radio monitoring detected less activity than probability allowed, areas of the sky that were statistically too quiet. A survey from a classified Air Force listening station, dated August 1964, mapped radio emissions across a section of the galactic plane. Standard procedure. Looking for anything unusual, they found a gap, a region roughly 15 degrees across where signal density dropped to near zero. Not empty space. Stars existed there, galaxies beyond. But the radio signature was wrong. Too quiet. As if something was absorbing transmissions. The report speculated. Natural explanation unlikely. Interstellar dust can attenuate signals but not eliminate them entirely. Recommend extended monitoring. Extended monitoring lasted 6 months. The gap remained. Then, without explanation, it filled in. Normal signal density returned, as if whatever had been blocking emissions had moved, or stopped. One log entry from May 1958 read, observed silence in target region for 72 consecutive hours. No natural explanation. Recommend follow-up observation. The follow-up observation, dated 2 weeks later. Region now shows expected baseline noise. Anomaly unexplained. Surveillance discontinued per directive. What directive? The file did not say. But I found 3 more instances of the same pattern across different years, different facilities, different target coordinates. Silence where there should be noise, then noise where there had been silence, always with the same conclusion. Surveillance discontinued. I began to understand that this was not about finding signals. This was about noticing absences. One document, a memo from a NASA contractor dated October 1964, laid it out explicitly. The search for extraterrestrial intelligence assumes contact is desirable. This assumption may be incorrect. We are listening for neighbours. We should be watching for predators. The memo was unsigned. But someone had written in the margin, this changes the objective entirely. Another note, dated 3 months later, attached to a survey of nearby star systems. If silence is a survival strategy, then broadcasting is suicide. The file included a graph. It showed the detection range of Earth's radio emissions over time. Starting in the early 20th century, a sphere of detectability expanding outward at the speed of light. By 1950, that sphere encompassed dozens of nearby stars. By 1970, hundreds. Someone had drawn a circle around the graph in red ink. Next to it, a single word, exposed. Chapter 3, The Dark Forest Memo. The document was dated March 1961. It was different from the others, typed on different paper, no letterhead, no agency designation, no author name. The typewriter was different too, an older model. The letters slightly faded as if this had been carbon copied multiple times. Just a title. Dark Forest Hypothesis. working theory. The language was cold, clinical, but the implications made my hands shake as I read. The memo began with an analogy. Imagine a dark forest at night. You are armed. You know others are also in the forest. You know they are also armed. You cannot know their intentions. You cannot know if they are hostile or peaceful. You cannot know if they are aware of you. The only certainty is this: making noise reveals your position. And revealing your position may be fatal. In such a forest, what is the rational strategy? Silence, observation, preparation. You do not call out to others. You do not light a fire. You move carefully. You listen. You assume the worst because the cost of assuming the best could be your extinction. The memo continued. The universe is a dark forest. Every civilization is armed with technology that could threaten others. Every civilization must assume others are armed as well. Communication reveals location. Location invites assessment. Assessment may conclude that eliminating a potential future threat is preferable to risking coexistence. It was the logic of First Strike, extended across light years. The memo outlined the core assumptions in numbered points. Someone had annotated each one in the margins. 1. Survival is the primary goal of every civilization. Margin note. Cannot assume altruism scales beyond planetary boundaries. 2. Resources are finite and growth is exponential. Margin note. Competition is inevitable. Cooperation requires trust. Trust requires communication. Communication reveals vulnerability. 3. Technological advancement is unpredictable and potentially weaponizable. Margin note. A civilization harmless today may be lethal in 1,000 years. Prevention is safer than reaction. 4. Communication is evidence of capability, and capability is evidence of potential threat. Margin note. The very act of detecting us proves we are advanced enough to be dangerous eventually. 5. The cost of eliminating a distant civilization is lower than the risk of allowing it to advance unchecked. Margin note. Especially if the civilization does not know you exist. No retaliation, no moral burden, just survival. The conclusion was stark. In such a universe, silence is the optimal strategy. Broadcasting is a death sentence. The absence of signals is not evidence of absence. It is evidence of fear. The memo then addressed counter-arguments. Someone had thought this through carefully. Counter-argument 1. Advanced civilizations will be peaceful by necessity. Violence is primitive. Cooperation is optimal. Response. This assumes all civilizations follow the same moral evolution. It assumes survival does not favour aggression. It assumes peaceful intent can be verified from light years away. None of these assumptions are safe. Counter-argument 2. The universe is large enough for everyone. No need for conflict. Response. Resources may be abundant now, but civilizations expand exponentially. Today's abundance becomes tomorrow's scarcity. Future threat is still threat. Elimination, while still weak, is logical. Counter-argument 3. We have not been eliminated yet. Therefore the hypothesis is wrong. Response. Our detectability is recent. Our technology is primitive. We may not be worth the effort yet, or the effort may already be in motion. Light speed delay means we would not know until it arrives. I checked the date again. March 1961. The science fiction novel that popularised this idea, that gave it the name Dark Forest, was not published until decades later. Yet here it was, in a government file, written by someone who understood the stakes. Someone had taken the Fermi paradox and turned it into a survival guide. The memo ended with a recommendation. Immediate review of all outbound transmissions, assessment of detectability timeline, consideration of broadcast moratorium. This should be treated as a potential extinction-level policy matter. Below that, in handwriting, I was beginning to recognise from the earlier notes. Presented to committee, rejected as speculative, but not refuted. And below that, in different handwriting, we are already too loud. The question is whether anyone is listening. Chapter 4. why we stopped looking so loudly. The shift happened quietly. No public announcement, no policy change that made headlines, but the file documented it clearly. In the early 1960s, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence was optimistic, public, well-funded. Scientists spoke openly about the day we would make contact, about the messages we would send, about the relationships we would build. Then something changed. A series of closed meetings beginning in late 1967. Attendees included astronomers, military advisors, intelligence analysts, and representatives from agencies whose names were redacted. The topic: risks associated with active transmission. The minutes from these meetings showed a stark divide. One camp argued for aggressive searching, broadcasting our existence, sending messages into space. The logic was hopeful. Any civilization capable of receiving our signals would be advanced enough to be peaceful. Contact would benefit humanity. The other camp argued for silence, for listening only, for treating the universe as hostile until proven otherwise. The logic was dark. We know nothing about the intentions of others. We cannot assume benevolence. We should not gamble our survival on optimism. One meeting note captured the debate. Proponent argues that advanced civilizations will be peaceful by necessity. Opponent counters that advanced civilizations will be efficient, and efficiency may favour elimination over negotiation. Another note. Question raised. What if first contact is last contact? The discussions were classified. The public continued to hear about SETI, about radio telescopes searching the stars, about the hopeful quest for cosmic neighbours. But behind the scenes, policy shifted. Funding for active transmission projects dried up. Proposals to send powerful, targeted signals into space were quietly rejected. Scientists who pushed too hard found their grants declined. One memo from 1972 marked internal use only. While passive observation continues, active broadcasting is discouraged pending further analysis of potential risks. This is not a formal prohibition, but a recommended posture. Translation. We are still listening, but we are trying very hard not to be heard. I found meeting notes from a debate in 1974 about the Arecibo message, a powerful radio signal aimed at a globular cluster 25,000 light-years away. Some saw it as a historic moment. Others saw it as a catastrophic mistake. One scientist, name redacted, argued, "We are children playing with matches in a dry forest. We do not know what is out there. We should not announce ourselves until we do." The transmission went ahead anyway. 3 minutes of broadcast, a message in binary describing Earth, humanity, our location in the galaxy. But in the file, someone had attached a note to the report about the transmission. First and last of its kind. No further active transmissions approved. We sent one message into the dark forest. Then we went silent. Not because we stopped looking, but because someone, somewhere, decided that looking back might be worse. Chapter 5. The civilizations that should exist but don't. The file included astronomical survey data, decades of it, observations of nearby star, systems, spectral analysis of distant galaxies, searches for megastructures, for artificial signatures, for any sign that intelligent life had expanded beyond its homeworld. The results were comprehensive and empty. No Dyson spheres surrounding stars, no transit signatures suggesting artificial constructs, no heat blooms from waste energy on a civilization-wide scale, no evidence of stellar engineering, no signs of galaxy-spanning empires, nothing. One report, dated 1983. Survey of 42 candidate systems within 50 light-years shows no anomalous energy signatures, no artificial structures detected, no evidence of technological civilization. Another, from 1991. Extended survey of 300 systems shows baseline stellar evolution, no deviations consistent with large-scale engineering. A third, from 2005. Galactic survey complete. No evidence of Type 2 or Type 3 civilizations in observable sample. Statistical models suggest we should detect multiple examples. Observed count 0. This was the heart of the Fermi paradox. Statistically, the galaxy should be full of life, full of civilizations, some younger than us, some millions of years older, and the old ones, the truly ancient ones, should be visible, obvious, unavoidable, but they were not there. The file proposed an explanation, not the only explanation, but one that fit the data. A document titled Filter Hypothesis, Alternative Model laid it out. Assumption. Technological civilizations arise frequently. Assumption. Expansion is energetically favourable and therefore likely. Assumption. No observed expansion despite sufficient time. Conclusion. Something prevents expansion before it becomes visible. The document continued. Candidates for prevention. Self-destruction. Civilizations destroy themselves before achieving interstellar capability. Resource collapse. Civilizations exhaust their environment and collapse. Transcendence. Civilizations move beyond physical forms we can detect. Predation. Civilizations are eliminated by external forces. Someone had circled predation and written in the margin, only option that explains both silence and absence. If civilizations destroyed themselves, we would see ruins, energy signatures from dead worlds, debris fields, something. If they transcended, we would see the transition, the shedding of physical infrastructure, the dimming of stars as they were no longer harvested. But we saw nothing, as if civilizations that grew too visible simply stopped existing. The file included a chilling statistical analysis, a graph showing the probability of detecting an expanding civilization over time. The curve climbed steadily. After 1 million years, detection probability approached near certainty. After 10 million years, it was statistically impossible for an expanding civilization to remain hidden. Yet, we detected none. The analysis concluded. Either we are alone, or visibility is fatal. Given the statistical improbability of being alone, the second option must be considered seriously. Below that, in now familiar handwriting, they are out there. We cannot see them because they are hiding, or because they are gone. Chapter 6. The Predator Hypothesis. This section was heavily redacted. Black bars across entire paragraphs. Sentences cut off mid-thought. Whole pages reduced to fragments and shadows. But enough remained to understand the theory, and to fear it. The hypothesis was simple and terrifying. The universe may contain what the file called enforcement civilizations. Ancient, powerful, silent. Their purpose, to prevent the rise of potential threats. Not conquerors, not empires building territory. Something colder, something more efficient. Gardeners, pruning the galaxy. The logic was laid out in fragments. An old civilization faces a problem. Young civilizations are unpredictable. Their technology advances rapidly. Their intentions are unknown. Their growth is exponential. They may become hostile. They may expand aggressively. They may develop weapons that threaten even ancient powers. Consider, a civilization 1 million years old has already solved the challenges we struggle with. Energy, resources, survival. They have had 1 million years to refine their technology. 1 million years to explore. 1 million years to observe younger species rise and fall. What would such a civilization fear? Not weapons, not war. Those threats are manageable with sufficient technology. What they would fear is unpredictability. The chance that a young species might develop something unexpected, something dangerous, something that threatens the established order. Solution: monitor emerging civilizations. Eliminate those that become detectable before they become dangerous. Not out of malice, out of self-preservation, out of cold, calculated risk management. Result: the galaxy remains quiet. The visible are removed. The invisible survive. And the old civilizations continue, unchallenged, for millions of years. The file referenced historical patterns on Earth. empires that eliminated rival city-states before they became threats, colonial powers that destroyed indigenous societies when they showed signs of technological advancement or unified resistance. Not because the empires were evil, not out of hatred, because they calculated that prevention was safer than coexistence, cheaper than future conflict, more certain than diplomacy. The Mongols destroyed the Khwarezmian Empire not because it had attacked them, but because it might. Rome salted Carthage not because Carthage was currently dangerous, but because it could become dangerous again. European colonizers eliminated advanced indigenous civilizations not because they were immediate threats, but because they represented potential future challenges. Now scale that logic to a galactic level, to timescales measured in millennia, to power differentials beyond comprehension. One partially redacted passage. A civilization 1 million years older than humanity would possess technology indistinguishable from redacted. The energy cost of eliminating a planet would be redacted. The moral calculus would be redacted, approximately 7 lines. The decision would be redacted, calculated in redacted, and executed with redacted. Whatever filled those blanks terrified the person who wrote this document, terrified them enough to classify it beyond what I was cleared to read. Another section described potential mechanisms, methods an advanced civilization might use to eliminate a target while maintaining deniability, while leaving no evidence, while appearing to be natural catastrophe. Kinetic impactors, asteroids redirected at relativistic speeds, accelerated over years using minimal undetectable thrust, impact velocity high enough to sterilize surface, appear completely natural, appear as if the target civilization was simply unlucky, no evidence of artificial intervention, no way to prove otherwise. The math was included. An asteroid 10 kilometers across, accelerated to 10% the speed of the light over 50 years, impact energy equivalent to redacted nuclear weapons, sufficient to redacted, detectability, only during final approach, response time, insufficient. Biological agents, tailored pathogens designed to target specific biochemistry, delivered via microprobes, released into atmosphere or water supply. Extinction within redacted, 1 line heavily redacted. Natural mutation and disease outbreaks already occur. Artificial disease indistinguishable from natural if designed properly. No evidence of external cause. Stellar manipulation, induced instability in target star. Methods. Redacted, full paragraph. Result. Stellar output increases. Planet experiences runaway greenhouse effect. Biosphere collapses. Civilization ends. Appears as natural stellar evolution. Astrophysicists might note anomalies but would attribute to rare but natural processes. Each method had the same characteristics: deniability, distance, patience. No need to land troops, no need to negotiate, no need to risk anything. Just observe, calculate, act, and move on. The file included a list of historical extinction events on Earth. Mass die-offs with no clear cause, sudden climate shifts, bombardments from space, the Permian extinction, 250 million years ago. 90% of species died. Cause? Debated. Volcanic activity. Asteroid impact. Methane release. No consensus. The Cretaceous extinction. 66 million years ago. Dinosaurs ended. Cause? Asteroid impact. But the asteroid timing was statistically unusual. Why did such a large impact occur exactly when dominant species had reached their peak? The Younger Dryas cooling. 12,800 years ago. Rapid temperature drop. Megafauna extinction. Human populations. Crashed. Cause? Debated. Comet impact. Volcanic activity. Ocean current disruption. Someone had written next to the list. How many of these were accidents? How many were probability? How many were intervention? And below that, in different handwriting, if enforcement exists, Earth has been sterilized at least 3 times. We are just the latest attempt, and we may not be the last. The hypothesis concluded with a grim assessment. If enforcement exists, it operates on scales we cannot observe and timelines we cannot predict. Detection would require technological capability we do not possess. Response would require defensive technology we cannot imagine. We may be monitored now. We may be evaluated. We may be scheduled for removal. The criteria for elimination are unknown. Detectability, expansion, technological capability, aggressive behaviour. Any or all of these may trigger response. Or we may simply not matter yet, until we do. Below that, a handwritten note that looked like it was added years later, the ink slightly faded. Checked archive for unexplained astronomical events. Multiple instances of stellar activity near systems with confirmed exoplanets. 19 cases between 1972 and 1998, where stars showed sudden brightness variations. No natural explanation satisfactory, all dismissed as instrument error or natural phenomena. But the pattern fits what enforcement might look like from a distance. And below that, more recent, in blue ink, cross-referenced with radio survey data, 7 of 19 systems previously showed possible artificial signals. After stellar events, silence, could be coincidence, could be civilization ending, no way to distinguish. And one final note, this one in pencil, barely legible. We might already be on the list. We might be in the queue, waiting our turn. Chapter 7. Earth becomes detectable. The timeline was clinical, dates and distances, but reading it felt like watching a countdown to midnight. 1895, Marconi develops radio, early experiments, low power, undetectable beyond Earth's atmosphere. 1920, commercial radio broadcasting begins, signals leak into space, detectable within a few light years. 1939, high-power radar developed for military use. Detection range expands to dozens of light years. 1945, nuclear detonations, Trinity test, Hiroshima, Nagasaki, brief but intense gamma signatures, detectable across hundreds of light years. 1950, Earth's radio bubble encompasses multiple star systems. We are visible. The file included a map, a sphere centered on Earth, expanding outward. Each circle marked with a date and a number, the count of star systems within detection range. 1930, 12 stars. 1950, 74 stars. 1970, 218 stars. 2000, thousands of stars. Hundreds of potentially habitable systems. Today, a sphere over 100 light-years in radius, containing millions of stars. We have been shouting into the void for over a century. Someone had drawn a red X over several star systems on the map. Next to it, candidate observer locations, statistical probability of detection, high. The file included an analysis of our most detectable moments. Early television broadcasts continuous low-level noise, military radar, high-power pulses, detectable signatures, nuclear testing, gamma-ray spikes, unambiguous artificial origin, deep space communication, Voyager, Pioneer, Arecibo message, deliberate transmissions. Each event made us more visible, more obvious, more unmistakably artificial. A margin note, handwritten, shaky. We went from invisible to screaming in less than a century. In cosmic terms, we just turned on a spotlight and started waving. Another note. If enforcement exists, they now know we are here. The question is not if they are coming. The question is when. The file included a calculation. Transit time for a probe travelling at 10% light speed. From the nearest star system where we would be detectable to Earth, 43 years. From a system 100 light-years away, 1,000 years. But those numbers assumed they were not already watching, that they had not already positioned observers, that they needed to travel from home. A final note at the bottom of the timeline. We assume detection means travel time plus decision time. But what if detection means activation time? What if they are already here, waiting? Chapter 8. The Watchers. This section was marked speculative, insufficient evidence, but it was also the longest section in the file, and the most heavily annotated, multiple hands, multiple years, as if different analysts kept returning to it, adding observations, circling patterns. It documented anomalies, objects and events that did not fit standard explanations, not proof, not confirmation, just patterns. The kind of patterns that make you wonder if you're seeing connections or inventing them. The file began with a list of objects of interest. 1960, Black Knight satellite rumours, officially debunked as space debris and camera artefacts. But the file contained telemetry data I had never seen in public sources. Data showing an object in polar orbit during a period when no nation had launched polar satellites. Unusual trajectory, highly eccentric, no known launch vehicle, no decay pattern consistent with debris. Signal emissions were detected by a tracking station in California. Encrypted, repeating, source unknown. Duration 3 days. Then silence. The object remained in orbit for 6 weeks, then disappeared. No re-entry signature, no debris field. One day it was there, the next day it was gone. A handwritten note. Retrieval, departure, equipment failure, unknown. 1973. Detected object in asteroid belt. Trajectory, inconsistent with natural orbit. Observed by a classified deep space tracking system for 6 months. The object appeared to be maintaining position relative to a specific point in space, not orbiting the sun, not following ballistic trajectory, holding position. Attempts to image it, unsuccessful, too small or too dark or too far. But radar returns confirmed something was there. Size estimate between 10 and 50 meters. Shape, elongated. Albedo, unusually low, as if designed not to reflect light. Then, in December 1973, it accelerated. Gentle thrust. Consistent application over 2 weeks. Not chemical propulsion. No thermal signature. No exhaust plume. Just steady, impossible acceleration. Final trajectory took it out of the solar system. Velocity at last observation, 0.03 the speed of light. An annotation in the margin. Natural object does not accelerate like this. No known technology can achieve this. What did we just watch leave? 1991. Near-Earth object with albedo inconsistent with known asteroid composition. Designated 1991 VG. Passed within lunar orbit. Official explanation. Small asteroid on unusual trajectory. But the file contained spectral analysis. The object's surface reflected light in a pattern not consistent with rock, ice, or metal. It reflected like ceramic, like composite material, like something manufactured. Size, approximately 10 meters. Shape, cylindrical. Rotation, tumbling, but the tumble rate changed during observation. As if something inside was shifting mass, or reorienting. It did not return. Last trajectory suggested it would take a solar orbit lasting decades, but when astronomers looked for it on predicted return dates, nothing appeared. Gone. Like it never existed. 2017. Oumuamua. Official explanation: interstellar asteroid. First confirmed object from outside our solar system. Shape: elongated, tumbling. Outgassing as it passed the sun. The file contained alternate analysis. Classified study by a team whose names were redacted. The study questioned everything. The shape was wrong. Too elongated. Statistical models suggested such extreme shapes should be rare. Yet the first interstellar object we ever detected just happened to be the weird one. The trajectory was wrong. Non-gravitational acceleration detected, officially attributed to outgassing. But the outgassing model required specific composition and specific orientation. Both unlikely. The tumble was wrong. Objects tumbling in space typically settle into rotation around their axis of greatest inertia. Oumuamua did not. It tumbled chaotically, as if multiple forces were acting on it, as if it was not a simple rock. The study concluded, natural origin cannot be ruled out, but probability is low. Recommend extended observation. Extended observation was impossible. Oumuamua was moving too fast. It passed through our solar system in weeks. By the time funding was allocated for follow-up, it was already gone. Fading, unreachable. A note at the bottom of the report. Convenient timing, discovered late, lost early, as if it did not want to be studied. Each entry included the phrase, insufficient data for conclusion. But taken together they suggested something. Presence, observation, surveillance. The file included a separate section on signals, radio emissions that appeared briefly then disappeared, always from unusual locations, always without clear origin. One report, October the 1982, signal detected from region near Lagrange, point 2, Earth-Moon Lagrange 2, the gravitational balance point behind the Moon, a natural position for a satellite, except we had no satellites there. Frequency, 1420 megahertz. The hydrogen line again. Duration, 42 seconds. Modulation pattern suggested digital data. Decryption impossible. Source triangulation attempted. Results indicated origin was indeed near Lagrange 2. Distance from Earth, approximately 400,000 kilometers. No known satellite at that location. No launches scheduled. No debris catalogued. Attempts to reacquire signal, unsuccessful. Follow-up observations, negative. Whatever transmitted was either gone or silent. Another report from March 1997. Reflected radar signature from object not in tracking database. Object appeared during routine space debris survey. Orbital characteristics unusual. Altitude, geostationary. But position was not one of the standard satellite slots. The object appeared to maintain position relative to Earth for 17 days. Perfect station keeping, no visible propulsion, no thermal signature. Then, on day 18, it was gone. No orbital decay, no re-entry, no debris. Simply absent from all tracking systems. Size estimate based on radar return, approximately 2 meters. Too small for most satellites, too large for debris, too stable for uncontrolled object. Assessment, unknown. Possibly classified asset from domestic or foreign program. Possibly equipment error. Possibly other. That last word. Other. Written in the clinical language of government analysis. But meaning something no one wanted to state directly. These were not alien spaceships. Not flying saucers. Not visitors. They were shadows. Hints. Possibilities. But the pattern was there. Objects in positions useful for observation. Signals from locations that made no sense. Brief appearances followed by vanishing, as if someone was watching and trying not to be seen. The file included a memo from an unnamed analyst. If we assume the enforcement hypothesis is correct, what would surveillance look like? Answer: minimal profile, passive observation, automated systems, no contact, no evidence, just watching. And if we search for such surveillance, what would we find? Answer: almost nothing. Occasional anomalies, objects we cannot explain, signals we cannot source, but never proof. This is consistent with what we observe. The memo continued. Recommendation: maintain awareness of unexplained objects near Earth. Track patterns. Do not dismiss anomalies as error or natural phenomena without thorough analysis. We may be monitored. We should know if we are. Someone had written in the margin, if they are watching, they are waiting. For what? And below that, for us to become a threat, or for authorization to remove one. Chapter 9. Why the public never heard this. I found myself wondering as I read deeper into the file why none of this had leaked. Why the world did not know. Why we still talked about the search for extraterrestrial intelligence with hope instead of fear. The answer was in a memo dated January 1976. Subject line: Public Disclosure Analysis, Dark Forest Hypothesis. The memo laid out the reasoning. Scenario: public disclosure of enforcement hypothesis. Likely reactions: panic, loss of faith in space exploration, demand for defensive measures that do not exist, conspiracy theories, accusations of government cover-up, erosion of institutional trust, fatalism. If elimination is inevitable, why plan for the future? Why invest in progress? Geopolitical instability. Nations may pursue aggressive space militarization. Arms race in orbit. The memo continued. Benefits of disclosure. None identified. Public cannot alter detectability. Earth's radio signature already propagated. Public cannot defend against hypothetical threat. No technology exists. Public cannot contribute to solution. Problem operates on timescales beyond human policy. Conclusion. Disclosure offers no benefit and significant risk. Information should remain classified pending development of actionable response capability. In other words, telling people would cause harm and would not help. So silence was the ethical choice. A handwritten note at the bottom. We are protecting them from knowledge they cannot use. Is that mercy or cowardice? The file included a secondary analysis. What would happen if the hypothesis was wrong? If we disclosed and it turned out the universe was empty or benign? The answer: institutional credibility destroyed, public trust shattered, for nothing. So the policy became, if the threat is real, disclosure will not save us. If the threat is not real, disclosure will harm us. Either way, silence wins. One final memo, dated much later, 2008. Review of disclosure policy. Recommendation. Maintain classification. Public discourse on Fermi paradox and dark forest theory now exists in academic and science fiction circles. Allowing public to treat this as speculation is preferable to confirming it as assessed threat. We were allowed to wonder, to theorize, to write novels, but never to know that someone somewhere in a government facility took it seriously enough to classify it. Chapter 10. The Choice. The final section of the file was not analysis, not data, not redacted paragraphs. It was a recommendation, written in 1989, updated in 2003, reviewed in 2014. The language was formal, assessment of threat level, unknown but potentially existential. Timeline for threat manifestation, unknown, could be immediate, could be centuries, could be never. Available response options, none sufficient. Recommended posture, strategic silence and reduced detectability. The recommendation outlines specific actions. Discontinue active broadcasting except where scientifically necessary. Monitor outbound signals for unnecessary leakage. Develop low-profile communication technologies. Delay deployment of high-energy space infrastructure. Maintain passive observation programs. Avoid provocative demonstrations of technological capability. In simple terms, stop shouting, stay quiet, hope we are not noticed. But the recommendation acknowledged the problem. Earth's radio signature already propagated over 100 light-years, cannot be recalled. Detectability is permanent. Strategy is damage limitation, not prevention. We had already made the mistake. Now we were trying to avoid making it worse. The final page of the file was a single paragraph. No classification marking, no signature, just a statement. In a universe where survival favours silence, the most dangerous sound is hello. We have said hello, we cannot unsay it, we can only wait to see if anyone responds, and hope that silence means safety, not preparation. Below that, in pencil, barely legible. 20 years since last review, still silent, still waiting. I looked at the date on that note. It was recent. Within the last 5 years, someone was still watching this file, still updating it, still waiting. Epilogue, the sound that ends everything. I closed the file, logged it, returned it to the archive. The process was automatic, mechanical, muscle memory from 3 years of doing this job, but my hands were shaking. The mouse cursor wandered across the screen as I tried to click the confirmation button. Outside the window, the lights of Washington glowed against the darkness. 3:30 in the morning now. The city never truly sleeps, but it quiets. Fewer cars, fewer lights in office windows, just the constant hum of a government that operates in shifts, in shadows, in classified facilities like this one. Satellites passed overhead. Invisible to me, but I knew they were there. GPS satellites broadcasting timing signals, communication satellites relaying phone calls and internet traffic, weather satellites imaging cloud patterns, military satellites doing things I would never know about, a constant stream of radio noise leaking into space. We had not stopped broadcasting, we had only stopped doing it on purpose. But the difference did not matter, not to anyone listening. I thought about the timeline in the file, the sphere of detectability, growing every second, expanding at the speed of a light, a bubble of electromagnetic noise with Earth at the centre. Right now, at this moment, that bubble was passing through new star systems, new potential observers, new possible enforcement civilizations. They were learning about us, learning that Earth exists, learning that we have technology, learning that we are here, and we could not take it back, could not recall the signals, could not hide what we had already broadcast. The radio waves from our first transmissions were already over 100 light years away. They would keep going, forever, a permanent announcement of our existence. I thought about the enforcement hypothesis. Ancient civilizations, patient, efficient, watching for threats, removing them before they become problems, not with armies, not with invasion fleets, with asteroids, with diseases, with stellar manipulation, methods that leave no evidence, methods that appear natural, methods that allow them to maintain their silence while ensuring ours. How long does it take, I wondered? How long between detection and action? If they are 10 light years away, 20 years minimum, 10 for our signals to reach them, 10 for whatever they send to reach us. If they are 100 light years away, 200 years. We might already be dead before the response arrives. Our grandchildren might be the ones who pay for our broadcasting. Or maybe they are closer. Maybe they are already here, watching, waiting. Automated systems left in our solar system millennia ago, monitoring for the emergence of intelligent life, reporting back to civilizations so distant we could never reach them, never respond, never negotiate. I thought about the anomalies, the unexplained objects, the brief signals, the patterns that might be surveillance, or might be nothing, the Black Knight satellite, Oumuamua, the signals from Lagrange points, the radar contacts that appeared and vanished, objects that did not behave like rocks or debris or human spacecraft. Were they watching us? Were they taking notes? Were they sending reports back to whoever or whatever deployed them? Assessment. Technological civilization detected. Radio emissions confirmed. Nuclear capability confirmed. Space exploration initiated. Threat level. Pending evaluation. And somewhere, light years away, something receives that report. Something decides. Something acts. Or maybe we are safe. Maybe we are too primitive to matter. Too far from any enforcement civilization to be worth the effort. Too insignificant to threaten anyone. But for how long? Every year we advance. Every year we launch more satellites, build more powerful transmitters, expand our presence in space. Eventually we will matter. Eventually we will cross whatever threshold they use to define threat, and we will never see it coming. The file offered no answers, only possibilities, only fear dressed up in bureaucratic language and classified stamps. But one thing was certain. In a universe where survival favours silence, we are the loudest voice in the room, and someone, somewhere, might be listening. Not with curiosity, not with welcome, not with the desire for contact or communication or cultural exchange, with assessment and patience, the kind of patience that measures time in millennia, that watches stars form and die, that observes species evolve and go extinct, that waits for the perfect moment to act. When the target is developed enough to be worth eliminating but not developed enough to defend itself. We went from invisible to undeniable in a single century, 100 years, a blink in cosmic time. We built radio, we built radar, we split the atom and announced it to the universe with gamma-ray bursts. We sent signals into space with our coordinates, our biology, our languages, our location in the galaxy. We did this without knowing if anyone was listening, without asking if we should, without considering that maybe the silence of the universe was not because we were alone. Maybe it was because everyone else had learned to be quiet. And now it is too late to take it back. Too late to go silent. Too late to hide. The sphere of detectability expands. The signals propagate. The evidence of our existence spreads across the galaxy at the speed of light. An expanding shell of proof that Earth exists, that humanity exists, that we are here. And somewhere, in the dark forest, something might have heard us. I shut down my workstation, locked my desk. The security guard at the exit nodded as I scanned my badge. He had no idea what files I had been reading, no idea what I had learned, no idea that the ceiling above us, the sky above that, the space above that, might not be empty, might be full of observers, patient, silent, waiting. The metro was nearly empty at this hour. I sat in a car by myself, watching the tunnel walls blur past, thinking about all the people asleep in the city above, all the people who would wake up tomorrow and go about their lives, working, shopping, falling in love, raising children, planning futures, never knowing that our future might not be ours to plan, never knowing that our continued existence might be a temporary condition, a grace period, a gap between detection and response. I got off at my stop, walked home through streets lit by LED lights that leaked photons into space, past houses with Wi-Fi routers broadcasting signals that added to Earth's electromagnetic signature, past cell towers transmitting conversations that became part of our announcement to the universe. We could not stop, could not go dark. Our civilization was built on communication, on connection, on broadcasting, the very things that might kill us. I reached my apartment, climbed the stairs, unlocked the door. Inside, everything was as I had left it. Normal, safe, ordinary. But I looked at it differently now. The wireless router blinking in the corner, the cell phone on the charger, the laptop connected to the internet. All of them talking, all of them adding their small contribution to Earth's voice, all of them making us louder. I went to the window, looked up at the sky. The city's light pollution washed out most of the stars, but I could see a few bright points in the darkness. Were they looking back? Were they cataloguing us? Filing reports? Making recommendations? Civilization detected? Technological advancement confirmed? Expansion capability emerging? Recommendation, monitor, or recommendation, eliminate. I pulled the curtain closed. The file is returned to the archive. The lights in the facility dim. Another night shift ends. The analyst goes home, the building locks, the secrets stay buried. But outside, the satellites keep broadcasting, the telescopes keep watching, the cell towers keep transmitting, the signals keep radiating into space, a constant stream of evidence, a permanent announcement. We cannot stop, we cannot hide, we're already too loud. We can only hope that silence means no one is home, and not that everyone is hiding for the same reason we should be. The dark forest is vast, filled with predators we cannot see, filled with civilizations that learned long ago that survival requires invisibility. And we just announced our location, shouted it, broadcast it on every frequency we could generate. Now we wait to see if anyone shouts back, or if the response comes without warning, without sound, without mercy, just silence, the final, permanent kind. The kind that has swallowed every other civilization that made the same mistake we did. The kind that might be coming for us right now, crossing the void, moving at a fraction of the light speed, patient, unstoppable, inevitable. And we would never know until it arrived, till the sky lit up with something falling, until the assessment became action, until the dark forest claimed another voice. I turned off the lights in my apartment, but outside the city glowed. The satellites transmitted, the radio towers broadcast. Earth kept shouting into the dark forest, and somewhere maybe something was listening, taking notes, making plans, waiting for the right moment, the moment when we mattered enough to be a threat, but not enough to defend ourselves. That moment might be now, might be 100 years from now, might be 1,000, or might be tomorrow. We would never know, not until it was too late. That is the final truth in the file I read tonight. That is the secret they keep classified. Not that we might be alone, but that we might have company, the dangerous kind, the kind that does not announce itself until it ends you. The coffee cup trembles in my weathered hands as I speak these words for the first time in 53 years. My name is Detective Raymond Kowalski, retired SFPD, and I'm dying. The doctors give me 3 months, maybe 4 if I'm lucky. But luck ran out for me the day I opened that damned Alcatraz file. They said Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers drowned in the frigid waters of San Francisco Bay on June 11th, 1962. The FBI closed the case. The warden slept easy. America's most infamous prison maintained its perfect record. But I found things I was never meant to see, things that made me understand why some truths are buried deeper than bodies. This is my confession. Not of crimes I committed, but of the crime I witnessed. The systematic erasure of 3 men who may have pulled off the impossible, only to disappear into something far worse than death. If you're listening to this recording, it means I'm gone, and maybe, just maybe, the truth can finally surface from the depths where it's been drowning all these years. It was October 1968 when Lieutenant Carson dropped the manila folder on my desk like it was radioactive. 6 years had passed since the escape, and the case was supposedly closed, filed away with all the other solved mysteries that kept the bureaucrats sleeping soundly. "Formality, Kowalski," Carson said, not meeting my eyes. "Washington wants a final review of the Alcatraz evidence. Dot the I's, cross the T's, confirm what we already know. They're fish food at the bottom of the bay." I should have known something was wrong by the way he said it. Carson was a straight shooter, the kind of cop who looked you in the eye when he talked. But that day, he stared at the wall behind me like the words might crawl off it and bite him. The file was thinner than I expected for the most famous prison break in American history. Basic escape details, witness statements from guards, the makeshift raft materials found on Angel Island. Nothing I hadn't read in the newspapers. Too clean, too neat. "Why me?" I asked. Carson finally looked at me then, and I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Fear. "Because you're thorough, maybe too thorough. They want this done right." He left me with those cryptic words and a growing certainty that this formality was anything but routine. I started with the obvious inconsistencies. The first was a car theft report from Marina District, filed 3 days after the escape. A 1959 Chevrolet, stolen from outside a boarding house. The owner, Mrs. Eleanor Hutchins, told police she saw 3 men walking away from the vehicle, heading toward the waterfront. When she called out to them, one turned and tipped his hat. "Polite as you please." "They had manners," she told the responding officer. "Real gentlemen. You don't expect that from criminals." The report was buried on page 47 of miscellaneous incident files. No follow-up, no investigation, no mention in the official Alcatraz case summary. Then there was the paddle, a crude wooden oar carved from driftwood, found by a fisherman near Richmond Bridge, 20 miles upriver from where the currents should have carried any debris. The fisherman, Miguel Santos, reported it to park rangers, who logged it as miscellaneous beach debris. No connection made to the escape, despite the timing and craftsmanship that clearly showed prison workshop techniques. But it was the witness statement that made my blood run cold. A night security guard at Fisherman's Wharf reported seeing 3 men in work clothes boarding a small fishing boat around 4 a.m. on June 12th. One of them had distinctive ears, prominent, almost pointed, just like John Anglin's mugshot description. The guard's statement was taken, filed, and apparently forgotten. When I tried to interview him, I learned he'd quit his job 2 weeks after the incident and moved back to Oregon. No forwarding address. "Don't dig too deep on this one, Ray," Carson warned me when I briefed him on my preliminary findings. "Some stones are better left unturned." That's when I knew I was onto something bigger than a prison break. The Anglin family farm in Ruskin, Florida felt like stepping into a different century. Spanish moss hung from ancient oaks, and the humid air carried the scent of orange blossoms and old secrets. Robert Anglin, the surviving brother, met me on the front porch with the wary eyes of a man who'd been expecting bad news for 6 years. "Federal agents been by here 4 times, he said without preamble, each time asking the same questions, getting the same answers. "My brother's drowned. That's what you want to hear, ain't it?" But his wife, Marie, had different ideas. After Robert went to tend the cattle, she pulled me aside in her kitchen, glancing nervously at the windows. "Christmas cards," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the ticking grandfather clock. "Every year since '63, no return address, just signed J&C in handwriting that looks mighty familiar." She showed me a shoebox filled with holiday cards, generic drugstore variety, postmarked from different cities: San Francisco, Los Angeles, Phoenix, Mexico City. The handwriting was careful, disguised, but there were telltale loops and slants that matched samples I'd obtained from the prison records. "Why haven't you told the FBI?" I asked. Marie's laugh was bitter. "You think we haven't tried? First agent said they were hoaxes. Second one confiscated them as evidence. Third one threatened to charge us with obstruction if we kept spreading false hope. These here are copies I made before they took the originals." Photographs came out next. 3 pictures, slightly blurry, showing 2 men in work shirts standing outside what appeared to be a South American cantina. The faces were partially obscured by shadows and hat brims, but the bone structure, the posture, the way one man favoured his left leg, it all matched the Anglin brothers' physical profiles. "Woman from church. Her daughter married a missionary. Sent these from Brazil in '65, Marie explained. Said these 2 Americans worked construction jobs, paid cash, kept to themselves, spoke English with Florida accents." I studied the photos with a magnifying glass. The man on the left had a distinctive scar on his forearm, a scar I remembered from Clarence Anglin's prison medical records, sustained in a workshop accident at Atlanta Federal Penitentiary. "FBI says they're look-alikes," Marie continued. "Coincidence, but a mother knows her son's detective. Even in shadows, even across oceans, those are my boys." The fear in her eyes wasn't the fear of grief or false hope. It was the fear of someone who knew more than she was saying, someone who'd been warned to keep quiet. As I left the farm that evening, I noticed a dark sedan parked down the country road, 2 figures visible in the front seats. When I drove past, they turned away, but not before I caught a glimpse of federal license plates. The Anglins were being watched. After 6 years, the dead men's family was still under surveillance. That night in my motel room, I spread out everything I'd gathered so far. The car theft, the paddle, the witness statements, the cards and photographs. Individually, they could be dismissed as coincidence or wishful thinking. Together, they painted a picture that made my hands shake as I wrote my preliminary report. Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers hadn't drowned in San Francisco Bay. They'd made it to shore, stolen transportation, and somehow managed to disappear into the wind. The question that kept me awake until dawn wasn't whether they'd survived the escape. It was why the government was so determined to pretend they hadn't. The National Archives building in Washington, D.C. has the kind of institutional grandeur designed to make visitors feel small and insignificant. As I walked through its marble corridors in November 1968, carrying my credentials and a growing list of questions, I felt exactly as intended. The records clerk, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses and the pallor of someone who spent his days in basement filing rooms, greeted my request with practiced bureaucratic indifference. Alcatraz escape files? Let me check the catalogue. He disappeared into the labyrinthine storage system, returning 20 minutes later with a puzzled frown. That's odd. The primary files show as transferred to federal custody in 1964, no longer available for review. Transferred where? Doesn't say. Just lists the authorization code. Project Paperclip Archive classified. Project Paperclip. Even a street cop from San Francisco knew that designation. The program that brought Nazi scientists to America after World War II. Why would an escape case be filed under intelligence classifications? What about the secondary files, witness statements, evidence logs? Another search, another apologetic shrug. Also transferred, same authorization. I spent 3 days in Washington, following leads that turned to smoke and asking questions that generated only nervous silence. At FBI headquarters, my request for case consultation was politely denied. At the Bureau of Prisons, I was told the relevant personnel were unavailable for comment. Even my police credentials and Lieutenant Carson's authorization letters seemed to carry no weight. It was Agent Patricia Hendricks, a bureau analyst I'd worked with on a previous case, who finally gave me the truth over drinks in a Georgetown bar. She waited until we were alone, until the other patrons had cleared out, until even the bartender was busy with inventory in the back room. "Ray, you need to drop this," she said quietly, her usual professional demeanour replaced by genuine concern. "The Alcatraz case isn't cold, it's radioactive." "What does that mean?" Patricia glanced around the empty bar before continuing. Internal memo came down in 65. Any agent pursuing Alcatraz leads beyond the official drowning conclusion would be transferred to Alaska or worse. 3 agents have been quietly reassigned since then. Good agents, career agents, all because they asked too many questions about 3 supposedly dead men. Why? If they drowned like the report says, what's the threat? Her laugh was hollow. That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? All I know is that certain people in very high places want Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers to stay dead, and they're willing to destroy careers to keep it that way. She slid an envelope across the table. I couldn't get you the files, but I managed to copy some of the index pages before they were sealed. Names, dates, reference numbers. Maybe you can piece together what we're not supposed to know. The documents were fragmentary, frustratingly incomplete, but they told a story that made my blood run cold. Cross-references to CIA front companies, mentions of asset recovery protocol, transfer authorization signed by officials whose names I recognised from the intelligence community. Most disturbing was a memo dated July 1962, just 1 month after the escape. Subjects may possess operational value. Recommend immediate field assessment rather than standard fugitive protocols. Operational value, not the language you'd use for bank robbers and car thieves. That night, in my Washington hotel room, I called Lieutenant Carson to report my findings. The conversation was brief and cryptic. "Ray, you need to come home. Now. I've got leads here, Lieutenant. Real leads. The leads will be there when you get back. If you get back. There are people asking questions about your questions, and those people have resources we don't. Come home." The line went dead. I packed quickly, checking the hallway twice before leaving my room. During the taxi ride to the airport, I noticed the same black sedan in my mirrors that had followed me from the archives building 3 days earlier. Back in San Francisco, Carson met me at the airport personally, something he'd never done before. His first words were a warning. "Your hotel room was searched yesterday. Professional job. Nothing taken, nothing damaged, but they wanted you to know they'd been there." As we drove through the city, he filled me in on developments from my end. Miguel Santos, the fisherman who found the paddle, died in a car accident outside Portland last week. Single vehicle collision on a straight road, clear weather, and Mrs. Hutchins, the lady who saw the car theft, moved to Phoenix, left no forwarding address. Her old neighbours say federal agents visited her the day before she left. The pattern was becoming clear. Anyone connected to evidence contradicting the official narrative was disappearing, voluntarily or otherwise. The Alcatraz case wasn't just closed, it was being actively suppressed by people with resources and authority I couldn't match. "What do I do, Lieutenant?" Carson pulled over and turned to face me. In 30 years of police work, I'd never seen him look so serious. "You write a report confirming the drowning theory. You file it properly. You forget everything you've learned, and you pray that's enough to keep you breathing." But I couldn't forget. The faces in those photographs. The fear in Mary Anglin's eyes. The systematic elimination of evidence and witnesses. Somewhere out there, the truth was buried so deep that powerful people were willing to destroy lives to keep it hidden. The question was whether I was brave enough, or stupid enough, to keep digging. Tony the Fish Marconi wasn't the kind of informant you'd find in a police procedural manual. A small-time smuggler with ties to both San Francisco's waterfront and various federal agencies that preferred not to be named, Tony survived by knowing when to talk and when to disappear. When he agreed to meet me at a dive bar in North Beach, I knew the information would be worth the risk. "You're playing with fire, detective," he said, stirring his whiskey with a nicotine-stained finger. "The Alcatraz thing? That ain't just a prison break, that's connected to some heavy government business." "What kind of business?" Tony glanced around the dim bar, noting the exits, the other patrons, the bartender's attention. Old habits from a life lived in the shadows. "You ever hear of something called the Prometheus Group?" I shook my head. "Private contractors, black budget operations, the kind of people who make problems disappear for Uncle Sam. Word on the street is they were running recruitment out of the Bay Area in the early 60s, looking for specific types, intelligent, adaptable, morally flexible, men who'd already proven they could operate outside the law." The implications hit me like a physical blow. "You're saying Morris and the Anglins were recruited?" "I'm saying Morris had an IQ of 133 and a talent for planning that impressed even the prison psychologists. The Anglin brothers were mechanical geniuses who could improvise solutions from scrap metal and determination. During the Cold War, those were valuable skills." Tony drained his whiskey and signalled for another. "Think about it. 3 men plan the perfect escape from America's most secure prison. They disappear without a trace, despite the biggest manhunt in federal history. Either they're criminal masterminds beyond anything we've seen, or they had help. Professional help." "What kind of help?" "The kind that comes with new identities, transportation, and assignments in places where questions aren't asked. South America was crawling with intelligence operations in the 60s. Cuba, Chile, Brazil. All potential flashpoints that needed experienced operators who couldn't be traced back to Washington. The theory was insane, but it explained the evidence I'd uncovered. The systematic suppression of information, the classified file transfers, the fear I'd encountered at every level of government. If the Alcatraz escape had been a recruitment operation disguised as a prison break, then admitting the men survived would expose a covert program that violated everything America claimed to stand for." "There's another possibility," Tony continued, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Maybe they weren't recruited. Maybe they stumbled onto something they weren't supposed to see." "Such as?" "Alcatraz was more than a prison, detective. It was a research facility. Mind control experiments, interrogation techniques, pharmaceutical trials, the kind of work that required subjects who couldn't complain to their congressman. What if Morris and the Anglins saw something during their time there? What if their escape wasn't about freedom, it was about exposure? My mind reeled with the implications. If the escapees had witnessed classified experiments, their capture wouldn't result in a return to prison. It would result in permanent silence. "I've heard whispers," Tony continued. "Black sites in Nevada, facilities that don't appear on any government maps, places where inconvenient people go to be forgotten, the kind of places where 3 escaped prisoners might end up if they knew too much." He finished his second whiskey and stood to leave. "One more thing, detective. You know why they call it the Prometheus Group?" I shook my head. "Prometheus stole fire from the gods and gave it to humanity. The gods punished him by chaining him to a rock where eagles ate his liver for eternity. Some gifts come with a price that never stops being paid." After Tony left, I sat in that dim bar for another hour, trying to process what he'd told me. 3 theories, each more disturbing than the last. Theory 1. Cold War recruitment. The escape was facilitated by intelligence agencies looking for deniable assets. Morris and the Anglins were extracted, given new identities, and deployed to international hotspots where their criminal skills could serve national interests. Theory 2. Witness protection in reverse. The men had seen classified activities at Alcatraz and escaped to avoid being silenced. Their continued existence threatened to expose government programs that officially didn't exist. Theory 3. The darkest possibility. They were captured alive after the escape and disappeared into the black site system, spending the rest of their lives as test subjects or interrogation practice for intelligence agencies that viewed them as expendable assets. Each theory explained the evidence I'd gathered. Each theory justified the extreme measures taken to suppress the truth. And each theory meant that Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers faced something far worse than drowning in San Francisco Bay. They faced erasure from history itself. 6 months later, against direct orders from Lieutenant Carson and my own better judgment, I found myself on a flight to Rio de Janeiro. The lead had come through Tony Marconi's network, a bartender in Ipanema who claimed to remember 2 American men matching the Anglin's description, regulars at his establishment from 1971 to 1978. They paid cash, spoke little Portuguese, and never talked about their past, the bartender Carlos told me through a translator. But they were different from other expatriates, more careful, always watching the exits, never sitting with their backs to the door. The description matched surveillance training, the kind of operational security taught to intelligence assets. Carlos produced a photograph taken during a Christmas party in 1975. A grainy image showing 2 men at the edge of the celebration, their faces partially obscured but their body language unmistakably American. My hands trembled as I studied the picture. The man on the left had the same jawline, the same ears, the same way of holding his shoulders that I'd memorized from Clarence Anglin's prison files. The other figure showed signs of premature aging, stress lines and grey hair that suggested a life lived under constant tension. "What happened to them?" I asked. Carlos's expression darkened. "They left suddenly, in the middle of the night. One day they were here. The next day their apartment was empty. The landlord said men in suits had come asking questions the week before. Americans, but not tourists. Government men." I spent another week in Rio following leads that grew colder with each passing day. The apartment building where the mystery Americans had lived was scheduled for demolition, its records mysteriously lost in a fire. The bank where they had allegedly maintained accounts had no record of American customers from that period. Every trail ended in convenient dead ends and missing documentation. On my final night in Brazil, I was approached by a man claiming to be a freelance journalist who'd been investigating the same story. We met at a beachside cafe in Copacabana, the sound of waves masking our conversation from potential surveillance. "You're the American detective asking about the Alcatraz escapees," he said without preamble. It wasn't a question. I neither confirmed nor denied, waiting for him to continue. "I've been working this story for 3 years," he said, "following reports of American fugitives throughout South America. The trail is real, detective, too real. These men lived here, worked here, built lives here. But every time I get close to proof, the sources disappear, witnesses relocate, documents vanish. I've had my hotel room searched, my phone tapped, my sources intimidated." He slid a manila envelope across the table. "This is everything I've gathered. Photographs, witness statements, financial records, hidden in different locations for 3 years, copied and recopied to prevent loss. It's yours now." "Why?" "Because I'm done." Yesterday, I received a visit from 2 men with American accents and no identification. They politely suggested that my investigation was endangering people I cared about. They showed me photographs of my sister's children playing in a park in Sao Paulo. Very clear photographs. Very recent photographs. The envelope contained a treasure trove of evidence. Bank records showing regular deposits to accounts held by men with obviously false Brazilian identities. Employment records from construction companies that had hired American workers without proper documentation. Hotel registries with signatures that bore striking resemblances to handwriting samples I'd obtained from Alcatraz. Most compelling was a photograph dated 1976 showing 3 men at a construction site in the Amazon basin. 2 matched the Anglin brothers' physical descriptions. The third was older, lean, with the kind of penetrating stare I remembered from Frank Morris's mugshot. All three wore work clothes and hard hats, looking like ordinary labourers except for their distinctly American postures and expressions. But like every other lead I'd followed, this one ended in frustration and fear. When I tried to contact the construction company, I learned it had been dissolved in 1979. The site where the photograph was taken was now underwater, flooded by a dam project that had relocated the entire local population. The pattern was always the same. Evidence of survival followed by systematic elimination of that evidence. Either I was chasing ghosts or someone with vast resources was staying one step ahead of every investigation. My flight back to San Francisco was delayed by mysterious mechanical problems. During the 6-hour layover in Mexico City, I noticed the same two men in different locations throughout the terminal, always at a distance, always watching, never making direct contact. When I finally boarded the plane, they weren't among the passengers. Lieutenant Carson met me at San Francisco International with news that made my blood run cold. Federal marshals raided your apartment yesterday, Ray. Warrant signed by a judge I've never heard of, for evidence in a case they wouldn't specify. They took everything, your files, your notes, your photographs, everything connected to Alcatraz. In the car ride home, he handed me an official-looking document. Transfer orders, effective immediately. You're being reassigned to the robbery division. Your Alcatraz investigation is officially terminated. On whose authority? Authority high enough that questioning it would end both our careers. Carson's voice carried a weight I'd never heard before. Ray, I've been a cop for 28 years. I've seen corruption, cover-ups and conspiracies, but I've never seen anything like this. The pressure to shut you down is coming from levels of government I didn't know existed. He pulled over in a secluded area of Golden Gate Park and turned to face me directly. Whatever you found down there, whatever you think you know, it's not worth your life. These people have made careers disappear for asking the wrong questions. They can make people disappear too. As he spoke, a black sedan with government plates drove slowly past us, its occupants clearly visible through tinted windows that somehow allowed us to see their faces while hiding their expressions. The message was unmistakable. We were being watched, our conversation monitored, our future actions carefully noted. That night, alone in my ransacked apartment, I realised the full scope of what I was up against. This wasn't just a cover-up of a prison escape. It was the systematic suppression of a truth so dangerous that the most powerful government in the world was willing to destroy lives to protect it. Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers hadn't just escaped from Alcatraz. They'd escaped into a shadow world where truth became enemy of the state, where survival meant accepting lies, and where the greatest prison of all was the silence that surrounded their fate. But silence, I was beginning to understand, has its own way of speaking to those willing to listen. 25 years passed like pages torn from a calendar and scattered by the wind. I worked robbery division, collected my pension, and tried to convince myself that some truths were better left buried. The Alcatraz case became a ghost that haunted my dreams, 3 faces staring at me from the depths of San Francisco Bay, asking why I'd abandoned the search for their story. Then came January 2013, and a letter that changed everything. The History Channel documentary was running old Alcatraz footage when the phone rang. It was my former partner, Jimmy Chen, now working cold cases for the FBI. His voice carried the excitement of a man who'd stumbled onto something extraordinary. Ray, you need to see this. Someone sent a letter to the Bureau claiming to be John Anglin. Says he's dying of cancer, wants to make a deal. Information about the escape in exchange for medical treatment. My hands shook as I read the photocopied letter Jimmy brought to my house that evening. The handwriting was shaky with age and illness, but certain flourishes matched the Christmas cards Marie Anglin had shown me decades earlier. The details were specific, accurate, insider knowledge that only someone who'd lived through the escape could possess. It's a hoax, Jimmy said, watching my reaction. Has to be. FBI handwriting analysis says inconclusive. Could be authentic, could be someone who studied the case extensively. But I knew better. The letter wasn't just about the escape. It mentioned details that had never been made public. references to guard rotation patterns that were classified, descriptions of cell modifications that weren't in any official report, knowledge that could only come from someone who'd been there, who'd lived through those final months of preparation. "There's more," Jimmy continued. "The letter mentions a meeting place, coordinates in the Bay Area, where supposedly Frank Morris left something hidden before the escape, information that was too dangerous to carry. The writer claims it's still there, waiting for someone brave enough to look. The coordinates led to a section of Angel Island State Park, near the spot where the makeshift raft materials had been found 51 years earlier. Against every instinct for self-preservation I'd developed, I found myself hiking those trails the following weekend, searching for something I couldn't name. It was hidden in a cave that didn't appear on any park maps, sealed behind rocks that looked natural but showed tool marks when examined closely. A waterproof container, military surplus from the 1960s, containing documents that made my blood run cold. Guard schedules from Alcatraz, annotated with personal notes about corruption and smuggling operations. Photographs of prison officials meeting with men in expensive suits who didn't appear in any government directories. Financial records showing payments from offshore accounts to wardens and guards who lived far beyond their official salaries. Most damning was a handwritten journal in Frank Morris's distinctive script, documenting what he'd witnessed during his time at Alcatraz. The prison wasn't just housing criminals, it was housing witnesses to government activities that violated constitutional protections. Political prisoners who'd been disappeared from the mainland. Foreign nationals being held without diplomatic notification. Test subjects for psychological experiments that would later be revealed as part of the MKUltra program. The final entry, dated 2 days before the escape, was prophetic in its certainty. We're not breaking out to be free, we're breaking out to stay alive. What we know, what we've seen, makes us more dangerous to them than any criminal they've ever housed. If we stay, we disappear quietly. If we escape and get caught, we disappear loudly. Our only chance is to vanish completely and hope the truth survives us. The documents explained everything. The official insistence on the drowning theory, the suppression of evidence, the systematic elimination of witnesses. The Alcatraz escape wasn't a crime to be solved. It was a national security incident to be contained. Morris and the Anglins hadn't just witnessed classified activities. They documented them, created a record of government crimes that could destroy careers and topple administrations. Their escape was both an act of desperation and a gamble that someday someone would be brave enough to tell their story. Reading those pages in the dim light of that hidden cave, I finally understood the true scope of the self-destruction paradox. The very actions taken to hide the truth had preserved it. The efforts to silence witnesses had created evidence. The attempts to erase history had documented it in detail. But understanding the truth and proving it were different challenges entirely. The men who'd orchestrated the cover-up were dead or retired, their crimes protected by classification systems and institutional amnesia. The witnesses were gone, scattered or silenced by 5 decades of systematic intimidation. Yet the letter kept haunting me. Someone claiming to be John Anglin, dying and desperate, reaching out across 50 years of silence to offer one final revelation. The FBI had dismissed it as a hoax, but their dismissal felt too quick, too certain, too reminiscent of the patterns I'd seen decades earlier. Late at night, when the pain in my chest reminded me of my own mortality, I wondered about the fates of 3 men who'd gambled everything on an impossible escape. Had they found freedom in the jungles of South America? Had they lived out their days under assumed names, carrying secrets too dangerous to share? Or had they been caught, disappeared into black sites where their knowledge died with them? The letter writer claimed John Anglin had survived into the 21st century, living with the weight of knowledge that could never be shared, watching as history branded him a criminal, while the real criminals wore badges and held office. If true, it was a torture more cruel than any prison cell, to know the truth and be unable to speak it, to carry justice in your heart while injustice wore your name. I kept the documents for 6 months before making my decision. They couldn't stay hidden. Too many people had died to protect these secrets, and too many others deserved to know the truth. But releasing them publicly would accomplish nothing except getting me killed and the evidence destroyed. Instead, I chose a different path. I copied everything, hid the copies in locations scattered across the country, and left instructions for their release upon my death. If the government wanted to suppress the truth, they'd have to do it posthumously, when I could no longer be intimidated or eliminated. The original documents I returned to their hiding place on Angel Island, along with my own written account of the investigation. Future generations might find them, might understand what they represented, might finally give Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers the justice they'd been denied for over half a century. But justice, I was learning, was a luxury the living could rarely afford. It was a gift we could only leave for the dead, a truth we could only speak when our own voices had been silenced. The morphine makes it difficult to focus, but I need to finish this recording while I still can. The doctors say hours now, maybe a day if I'm stubborn enough to fight the inevitable. I've been fighting for 78 years. What's one more battle against the darkness? I've spent 53 years carrying the weight of what I learned about Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers. 53 years of waking up in cold sweats, wondering if today would be the day federal agents knocked on my door with a permanent solution to my inconvenient knowledge. 53 years of looking over my shoulder, checking my rearview mirror, and jumping at unexpected phone calls. The truth is a heavy burden when you're carrying it alone. I don't know if Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers lived out their days in Brazilian freedom, sipping caipirinhas on Ipanema Beach and laughing at the federal agents who'd spent decades searching for their corpses. I don't know if they died namelessly in some government facility, their final words lost in soundproof rooms designed to swallow screams. But I do know this with absolute certainty. They didn't drown in San Francisco Bay on June 11th, 1962. The evidence was always there for anyone brave enough to look past the official narrative. The car theft, the witness statements, the photographs from South America, the Christmas cards signed with familiar initials, each piece individually dismissed as coincidence or hoax, but collectively forming a picture of survival that powerful people needed to deny. The government's insistence on the drowning theory wasn't about maintaining Alcatraz's reputation or protecting prison security. It was about hiding activities that violated every principle America claimed to represent. The research programs, the intelligence operations, the systematic elimination of witnesses, all of it justified by national security classifications that turned constitutional protections into classified waste paper. Morris and the Anglins weren't just criminals who pulled off the perfect escape. They were inconvenient witnesses to state-sanctioned crimes, men whose continued existence threatened to expose a shadow government that operated beyond law, beyond oversight, beyond accountability. Their escape became their crime, their knowledge became their death sentence, their survival became a national security threat that required decades of cover-ups, intimidation, and murder to contain. I've left evidence of everything I'd discovered, hidden in multiple locations protected by legal arrangements that will trigger automatic release upon my death. Some truths are too important to die with the men who discover them. The morphine is winning now, and the room is getting darker. But before I fade away, I want to leave you with this final thought. Alcatraz was never escape-proof because its walls were too high or its waters too cold. It was escape-proof because the government made survival more dangerous than imprisonment, freedom more terrifying than captivity. The greatest prison isn't built with stone and steel. It's built with silence and fear, with official denials and convenient accidents, with careers destroyed and witnesses disappeared. Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers didn't die in San Francisco Bay. The bay didn't kill them. The silence did. And silence. Silence is the strongest prison of all. But even silence eventually comes to an end. Recording ends with the sound of steady breathing that gradually grows fainter, until only the mechanical hum of hospital equipment remains. Found among Detective Raymond Kowalski's personal effects, along with detailed instructions for the release of sealed documents and recordings. To whoever finds this recording and follows the trail I've left behind, my name was Detective Raymond Kowalski, badge number 2847, San Francisco Police Department. I died on December 20th, 2021, at 3:17 a.m. alone except for the ghosts of 3 men whose story I spent a lifetime trying to tell. If you're reading this, it means the legal mechanisms I put in place have been triggered. Safety deposit boxes in 7 different states will have been opened. Law offices in 4 different cities will have released sealed documents. Digital files stored in multiple secure locations will have been automatically transmitted to journalists, historians, and government oversight committees. I've spent 53 years preparing for this moment, the moment when my voice could finally break the silence that has protected one of the greatest cover-ups in American history. The documents you now have access to represent only a fraction of what was hidden. For every piece of evidence I managed to preserve, dozens more were destroyed by people who understood that truth was their greatest enemy. But what remains is enough. Enough to prove that Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers survived their escape from Alcatraz. Enough to demonstrate the systematic suppression of evidence by multiple government agencies. Enough to show that the official narrative was a carefully constructed lie designed to protect state secrets more valuable than human lives. I need you to understand something. The men who orchestrated this cover-up weren't comic book villains twirling their moustaches in shadowy rooms. They were patriots in their own minds. They believed that protecting classified operations was more important than acknowledging 3 escaped prisoners. They convinced themselves that national security justified any level of deception, any amount of witness intimidation, any degree of evidence suppression. They were wrong. In a democracy, truth cannot be classified indefinitely. Justice cannot be postponed forever. The families of Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers deserve to know their fates. The American people deserve to know what their government did in their name. History deserved an accurate record, not a convenient fiction. I've carried this burden alone because I was afraid. Afraid of losing my pension, my reputation, my life. Afraid of being dismissed as a conspiracy theorist or a disgruntled cop. Afraid that speaking the truth would accomplish nothing except getting me killed. But fear, I've learned, is just another form of prison. And like Alcatraz itself, it's only escape-proof, as long as you believe the walls are stronger than your determination to break free. To the families of Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers, your loved ones were not the criminals history has made them out to be. They were witnesses to government crimes who paid the ultimate price for their knowledge. Whether they found freedom in South America or died in government custody, they deserved better than 50 years of official denial and systematic character assassination. To the government officials who will undoubtedly attempt to discredit these revelations, your time is over. The men who created this cover-up are dead. The operations they were protecting have been declassified or exposed through other channels. The only thing your continued denials accomplish is further damage to public trust in institutions that have already lost too much credibility. To the historians and journalists who will investigate these claims, be careful, be thorough, be brave. The people who killed witnesses and destroyed evidence may be gone, but the systems they created to protect state secrets remain in place. Truth-telling is still a dangerous profession in America. To Frank Morris, John Anglin, and Clarence Anglin, wherever your final resting places may be, your story is finally being told. Your truth is finally being spoken. Your silence is finally being broken. You escaped from Alcatraz on June 11th, 1962. You survived the waters of San Francisco Bay. You lived beyond that night, whatever your ultimate fates may have been. History will remember you not as the criminals who failed to escape, but as the men who succeeded too well for the government's comfort. Your greatest escape wasn't from prison. It was from the official narrative that tried to erase you from history. That escape, at least, was permanent. Final statement for the record. I, Detective Raymond Kowalski, being of sound mind and facing imminent death, do hereby swear under oath that every statement in this recording and its accompanying documents represents the truth as I discovered it through my official investigation into the Alcatraz escape of 1962. I have knowingly risked my career, my safety, and my life to preserve this information. I have done so not for personal gain or professional advancement, but because I believe that in a democracy, truth belongs to the people, not to the bureaucrats who find it inconvenient. If my death occurs under
What if
suspicious
the most powerful
circumstances,
secret
if
society
these
in
documents
history
are
wasn't
somehow
the
suppressed or
Illuminati,
discredited,
the Knights Templar,
if this recording
or even the modern
mysteriously
Freemasons,
disappears, let it
the
stand
three
as
men
evidence
whose
that
names
the
have been
cover-up I've
deliberately erased
documented
from every
continues to claim
record.
lives. But if this
Tonight,
message reaches you
we dive
intact,
deep into the
if
digital
the truth
shadows
I've preserved
to uncover a
finally sees
conspiracy
daylight,
so intricate,
then
so
maybe,
carefully hidden,
just maybe,
that discovering
the
it
strongest
might be the
prison of
last thing you
all
ever
has
do.
finally been breached. Before we begin,
The silence is
what
broken,
conspiracy would
the
you
truth
like us
is
to
free,
investigate next?
and Frank Morris
Ancient
and the Anglin
bloodlines
brothers controlling
finally
world
rest in
government,
peace,
the
knowing
real
their
purpose
story
behind
has been
social
told.
media algorithms,
Badge
or
2847,
perhaps something even
signing off
darker,
for the final
lurking
time in the depths of the internet. Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to Sleep Theories for more late-night investigations that will keep you awake long after the credits roll. The blue glow of Dorian Cade's monitors cast long shadows across his cluttered apartment at 3:47 a.m. Empty energy drink cans formed a metallic skyline around his workstation, where 4 screens displayed cascading lines of encrypted data. This was his domain, the digital underworld where secrets lived and died in streams of code. Dorian had always been drawn to the spaces between spaces, the forgotten corners of the internet where truth hid behind layers of encryption. By day, he was just another cybersecurity analyst for Titan Defense Systems, debugging firewalls and hunting malware. But by night, he was something else entirely, a digital archaeologist, excavating buried information from the deepest recesses of the web. Tonight's target was a seemingly innocuous file archive he'd discovered on a defunct server that once belonged to the Grand Lodge of Pennsylvania. The files were old, some dating back to the early digitization efforts of the 1990s, when historical documents were first being converted from physical to digital formats. Most of it was mundane, meeting minutes, membership rolls, financial records, the kind of material that would put most people to sleep. But Dorian wasn't most people. As his decryption algorithms worked through the data, something unusual caught his attention. Buried within a folder labelled Historical Correspondence, MISC, was a file that didn't match the others. The metadata was wrong, the encryption was different, and when he finally cracked it open, what he found made his pulse quicken. It was a single image, a symbol he had never seen before. 3 interlocked triangles formed an intricate pattern that seemed to shift and move in his peripheral vision. Each triangle was perfectly equilateral, but where they intersected, strange geometric forms emerged, creating an optical illusion that was both mesmerizing and unsettling. Beneath the symbol was a single line of text, the triune accord established. 1717 AVCRJH. Dorian leaned back in his chair, fingers drumming against his desk. 1717. That was the same year the Grand Lodge of London was established, marking the beginning of organised Freemasonry. But what was the Triune Accord, and who were AV, CR and JH? He screenshotted the image and began reverse searching it through every database he could access. Nothing. No matches, no similar images, no references anywhere on the indexed internet. It was as if this symbol existed in a void, completely disconnected from the digital world. The mystery deepened when he examined the file's digital signature. According to the metadata, this document had been accessed and modified hundreds of times over the past 30 years, but always by anonymous users with no traceable digital footprints. Someone, or multiple someones, had been maintaining this file, keeping it alive in the digital space while ensuring it remained invisible to casual observers. Dorian's hands moved instinctively to his keyboard. He had found something that wasn't supposed to be found, touched something that wasn't supposed to be touched. And now, he couldn't let it go. The hunt had begun. 3 days of relentless searching had yielded fragments, tantalizing pieces of a puzzle that refused to come together. Dorian had barely slept, surviving on caffeine and the electric thrill of discovery. His apartment had transformed into a conspiracy theorist's dream, with printed documents taped to every available wall surface, and red string connecting seemingly random data points. The breakthrough came when he cross-referenced the initials AV, CR, and JH with historical Masonic records from the early 18th century. Traditional sources yielded nothing, but when he dug into the darker corners of academic databases, forgotten doctoral dissertations, obscure historical journals, private collections that had been digitized but never properly indexed, patterns began to emerge. In a 1987 thesis on esoteric influences in early American politics, he found a footnote referencing 3 mysterious benefactors who had allegedly provided funding for the construction of several early American government buildings. The author had dismissed the claims as unsubstantiated rumours, but had noted that the same 3 sets of initials appeared in financial records from Philadelphia, Boston and Charleston between 1720 and 1750. A deeper dive into banking archives from the period revealed something extraordinary. Dorian discovered a series of encrypted letters between European aristocrats and early American colonists, all revolving around something called the doctrine of quiet influence. The letters, written in a cipher that had taken him 2 full days to crack, described a methodology for guiding human behaviour through subtle manipulation of symbols, language, and social structures. But it was the names that made his blood run cold. The letters were signed with the same initials, AV, CR, and JH. According to the correspondence, these 3 men weren't just wealthy benefactors. They were the architects of a new form of power, one that didn't rely on armies or political office, but on the manipulation of human psychology itself. They had studied the old mystery schools, the ancient techniques of persuasion and control, and had adapted them for a new age. One letter, dated 1734, was particularly chilling. The masses believe they choose their own thoughts, their own desires, their own leaders. They do not understand that choice itself can be manufactured, shaped like clay in the hands of those who understand the deeper mechanics of the human mind. We 3 have laid the foundation stones. Future generations will build upon our work without ever knowing our names. Dorian printed out the letter and pinned it to his wall next to the symbol of the 3 interlocked triangles. The pattern was starting to make sense. These weren't just random geometric shapes. They were a visual representation of the 3 founders' methodology. Each triangle represented a different sphere of influence: political, economic, and cultural. Where they intersected, control was established. But who were they? The initials were all he had to go on, and despite hours of searching, he couldn't find any historical figures from the period whose names matched. It was as if they had been deliberately erased from the historical record. That's when he made his second major discovery. Hidden within the financial records was a reference to something called the Lodge of 3 Pillars. Not an official Masonic lodge, but what appeared to be a secret organisation within the larger Masonic structure. The 3 pillars, according to the documents, were AV, CR, and JH themselves. Dorian's excitement was tempered by a growing sense of unease. He was uncovering something that had been buried for nearly 3 centuries, something that powerful people had gone to great lengths to hide. The deeper he dug, the more he realised that this wasn't just history. It was a blueprint, a framework that was still being used. As the sun rose over the city, casting golden light through his apartment windows, Dorian stared at the wall of evidence he'd assembled. The 3 Masons, as he had begun calling them, had created more than just a secret society. They had engineered a system of control that devolved and adapted over centuries, invisible but omnipresent. And now he was beginning to understand how it worked. The realization hit Dorian like a physical blow as he sat in his favourite coffee shop, laptop open, surrounded by the mundane chatter of the morning commuters. He had been analysing media patterns for the past week, looking for connections to the doctrine of quiet influence, when the data suddenly cohered into a terrifying picture. It was everywhere. The 3 interlocked triangles, the symbol of the triune accord, weren't just hidden in dusty historical archives. They were embedded in the fabric of modern culture, disguised and abstracted but unmistakably present. Movie logos, corporate brands, architectural designs, even the layout of popular websites, all contained subtle variations of the 3 triangle pattern. Dorian's hand shook as he scrolled through his analysis. He had developed an algorithm to detect geometric patterns that matched the mathematical relationships inherent in the original symbol. The results were overwhelming. Major Hollywood studios, Fortune 500 companies, news networks and social media platforms all incorporated elements of the design into their visual identity. But it went deeper than logos and branding. The doctrine of quiet influence, as described in the 18th century letters, relied on three key principles: repetition, authority, and emotional resonance. Dorian began to see these principles reflected in everything from political campaigns to advertising strategies to social media algorithms. The coffee in his cup grew cold as he dove deeper into the pattern recognition data. Primetime television shows contained dialogue structures that followed specific linguistic patterns outlined in the historical documents. Popular songs used chord progressions and lyrical frameworks that aligned with the emotional manipulation techniques described in the letters. Even children's programming seemed to incorporate subliminal messaging systems derived from the Three Masons' psychological frameworks. The most disturbing discovery came when he analysed news broadcasts from the past decade. Major networks, regardless of their political orientation, used nearly identical linguistic structures when reporting on controversial topics. The language was designed to create emotional responses that bypassed rational analysis, exactly as the doctrine had prescribed. Dorian closed his laptop and walked home in a daze. His apartment felt different now, contaminated by the knowledge he carried. Every advertisement on the subway, every billboard along the street, every notification on his phone, they all looked different through the lens of what he now understood. That evening he began compiling a comprehensive digital archive of his findings. If what he suspected was true, if the Three Masons' influence had not only survived but thrived in the modern era, then someone needed to document it. He created encrypted backups of everything: the historical documents, his analysis algorithms, the pattern recognition data, his own notes and theories. As he worked, a new question haunted him. If the Three Masons had successfully embedded their control systems into modern society, who was running those systems now? The original architects had died centuries ago, but their work lived on. Someone was maintaining it, updating it, ensuring its continued effectiveness. Dorian pulled up recent financial records from some of the corporations that featured the strongest pattern matches. Shell companies, offshore accounts, anonymous investors. The ownership structures were labyrinthine, designed to obscure rather than reveal. But patterns emerged here too. The same investment firms appeared again and again, the same legal structures, the same carefully anonymized board members. It was a network, vast and interconnected, spanning industries and continents, and at its heart Dorian was beginning to suspect were the modern inheritors of the Three Masons' legacy. He named his archive the Veil Project and began preparing it for release. The world had a right to know about the invisible architecture of influence that shaped their daily lives, but as he prepared to upload his findings to multiple whistleblower platforms, his computer screen flickered. For just a moment, the three interlocked triangles appeared in the corner of his monitor. There and gone so quickly he almost convinced himself he had imagined it. Almost. The message appeared in Dorian's private encrypted chat channel at 2:33 a.m, exactly 72 hours after he had discovered the pattern recognition data. The sender was listed as anonymous, but the message itself was anything but anonymous. It was clearly directed at him, containing details that only someone who had been watching his research could know. The three still watch. Stop now, Dorian. Dorian stared at the screen, his heart pounding. He had been so careful, using multiple layers of encryption, routing his traffic through a dozen different proxy servers, maintaining operational security that should have made him invisible to all but the most sophisticated surveillance operations. But they had found him. He ran a full system scan, checking for malware, backdoors, any sign of compromise. His security software came back clean, but Dorian knew that meant nothing. If someone had the resources to track his research, despite his precautions, they would also have the resources to hide their presence on his system. The paranoia began slowly, like a low-grade fever. Every notification on his phone made him jump. Every knock on his apartment door sent adrenaline coursing through his veins. He started noticing things that might have been coincidences. The same car parked outside his building for 3 days, a man in a coffee shop who looked away too quickly when Dorian glanced in his direction. The second message arrived 48 hours later, this time containing a photograph. It showed Dorian sitting at his computer, taken from inside his own apartment. The timestamp indicated it had been captured the previous night while he worked on the Veil project. Someone had been inside his home. Dorian immediately conducted a physical sweep of his apartment. He found the device hidden inside the frame of his bedroom mirror. A microcamera so small he almost missed it, connected to a transmitter that was broadcasting his every move to an unknown receiver. But the camera was just the beginning. A more thorough search revealed audio pickups in his kitchen and living room, keystroke loggers attached to his computer equipment, and something that looked like a network tap spliced into his Ethernet cable. His entire life was being monitored. The rational part of his mind told him to stop, to destroy his research and return to his normal life. But Dorian had never been particularly rational. The invasion of his privacy, rather than deterring him, only confirmed that he was onto something significant. You didn't deploy military-grade surveillance equipment against someone who was chasing shadows. He began operating under the assumption that everything he did was being watched. He established new research protocols, using air-gapped computers and physical storage devices that never connected to the internet. He moved his most sensitive work to a storage unit across town, accessible only by physical key. He varied his routines, took different routes to work, paid for everything in cash, but the watchers adapted too. His work computer at Titan Defense Systems began experiencing mysterious glitches. Files would disappear and reappear. His security clearance was subjected to routine reviews that felt anything but routine. Colleagues who had been friendly for years suddenly seemed distant, their conversations stilted and careful. The third message was different. Instead of a text, he received a link to a news article about a cybersecurity researcher in Seattle who had died in a car accident. The researcher, according to the article, had been working on sensitive projects related to digital privacy and surveillance. The accident had occurred at 3:17 a.m. on a straight stretch of highway, with no other vehicles involved. Dorian noticed that the timestamp on the article was exactly 3 minutes before he received the link. The message was clear: this could happen to you. But by then, Dorian was too deep to surface. The Veil project had expanded beyond his original scope, becoming an obsession that consumed his waking hours and invaded his dreams. He had uncovered something that went beyond historical curiosity or academic research. The Three Masons weren't just a fascinating historical footnote, they were the architects of a system that was still actively shaping human society. And someone was willing to kill to keep that secret hidden. That night, Dorian made a decision that would change everything. If they wanted to silence him, they would have to find him first. He began preparations for what he called Project Deep Dive, a final comprehensive investigation that would either expose the truth about the Three Masons or confirm his own paranoid delusions. Either way, he would have his answer. As he packed his research materials and prepared to disappear into the digital underground, Dorian caught a glimpse of his reflection in the bathroom mirror. He looked like a man who had seen too much, learned too much, gone too far down a rabbit hole that might not have an exit. But he also looked like a man who was finally fully alive. The abandoned subway station beneath downtown had been closed since 1962, but Dorian's research had revealed that its tunnels connected to a network of service corridors that ran beneath several government buildings. More importantly, the location offered something he desperately needed: complete isolation from digital surveillance. He had spent 3 days preparing his mobile command center. Military-grade Faraday cages protected his equipment from electronic monitoring. Satellite internet connections routed through multiple international proxies provided connectivity that would be nearly impossible to trace. Battery packs and portable generators ensured he could operate for weeks without external power. The setup looked like something out of a post-apocalyptic thriller, and Dorian couldn't shake the feeling that it might represent his future. A life spent in the shadows, hunted by forces he barely understood. But it was here, in the depths beneath the city that he finally breached what he had come to think of as the vault. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. While analysing the financial networks he had discovered, Dorian noticed that several key transactions were processed through a server cluster housed in the Smithsonian Institution's digital archive facility. The Smithsonian servers weren't just repositories for historical documents. They were hosting active financial systems for the network of corporations connected to the Three Masons pattern. Using exploit tools from his defence contractor days, Dorian tunnelled into the archive system through a maintenance portal that had been forgotten during a security update. What he found inside defied his wildest expectations. The vault wasn't a single database, it was an entire hidden internet, a shadow network that existed parallel to the visible web. Accessible only through specific cryptographic keys that appeared to be distributed to a select group of users, the vault contained terabytes of data spanning 3 centuries. The most recent files were mind-bending. Detailed psychological profiles of world leaders, media manipulation strategies updated in real time, algorithmic frameworks for managing public opinion through social media platforms. But it was the historical archives that truly shocked him. Digitized manuscripts described secret chambers beneath Washington, D.C., built during the Capitol's construction according to specifications provided by the Three Masons. The chambers weren't just meeting spaces. They were designed as psychological amplification devices, using acoustic engineering and symbolic geometry to enhance the persuasive power of those who spoke within them. Architectural drawings showed that the entire layout of the Capitol building, the White House, and the Supreme Court formed a massive version of the 3 interlocked triangles when viewed from above. The buildings weren't just symbols of American democracy, they were active components in a system designed to channel and focus political influence. But the most disturbing documents dealt with something called the Great Work, an ongoing project to gradually reshape human consciousness through systematic manipulation of culture, education, and information systems. The Great Work wasn't a conspiracy in the traditional sense. It was presented as a form of guided evolution, helping humanity develop according to principles established by the Three Masons. According to the documents, every major social movement of the past 2 centuries had been either initiated or co-opted by the inheritors of the Three Masons' legacy. Wars, revolutions, technological breakthroughs, cultural shifts, all were pieces in a vast game being played by invisible hands. And Dorian discovered that modern political speeches were crafted using linguistic frameworks, derived directly from the original doctrine of quiet influence. Presidential debates, congressional hearings, Supreme Court arguments, all followed scripted patterns designed to produce predetermined emotional responses in viewers. Entertainment media was even more thoroughly controlled. Hollywood studios, record labels, publishing houses, all were connected to the network through complex ownership structures. Popular culture wasn't a reflection of society's values. It was a tool for shaping those values. As Dorian delved deeper into the vault, he began to understand the true scope of what he was facing. This wasn't just a historical conspiracy. It was a living system, constantly evolving and adapting to new technologies and social conditions. The Three Masons had died centuries ago, but their work lived on through institutions, traditions, and methodologies that had become so embedded in society that they were virtually invisible. The most chilling realization came when he discovered his own file in the vault's database. They had been monitoring him for months, tracking his research, analysing his psychological profile, preparing countermeasures. His investigation hadn't been a secret quest for truth. It had been a carefully observed experiment. But why let him discover so much? Why allow him to penetrate their most sensitive archives? The answer came in a document titled Protocol 7, Asset Integration. Dorian's blood ran cold as he read the clinical assessment of his psychological profile, his motivations, his likely responses to various stimuli. He wasn't just a threat to be eliminated, he was a potential asset to be recruited. The file indicated that his research skills and psychological profile made him an ideal candidate for voluntary integration into their network. His investigation of the Three Masons hadn't been a violation of their security, It had been an audition. As this understanding washed over him, Dorian noticed something that made his hands shake. The documents he was accessing contained metadata signatures, hidden markers that traced every query back to his specific location and identity. By exploring the vault, he wasn't just learning their secrets, he was leaving digital fingerprints that proved he had been there. The final piece of the puzzle revealed itself at 4:47 a.m. on what Dorian would later realise was his last night of freedom. He had been analysing the most recent uploads to the vault, real-time data feeds that showed the Three Masons influence network in active operation. What he discovered was breathtaking in its scope and terrifying in its implications. The network wasn't just influencing culture and politics. It was actively shaping reality itself through coordinated manipulation of information systems. Social media algorithms were tweaked to promote specific narratives. Search engine results were subtly adjusted to guide public research toward predetermined conclusions. News recommendation systems were programmed to create echo chambers that reinforced desired belief patterns. But the most sophisticated element was something they called consensus engineering. By carefully managing the flow of information across multiple platforms simultaneously, the network could create the illusion that certain ideas were organically emerging from grassroots movements, when in fact they were being systematically planted and cultivated. Dorian watched in real time as a coordinated information campaign was launched across dozens of platforms. A political controversy that would dominate news cycles for weeks was being artificially created through carefully timed leaks, strategic social media posts, and coordinated commentary from influencers who probably didn't even realise they were part of the operation. The level of coordination was staggering. Television networks, newspapers, social media platforms, and even individual bloggers were all receiving talking points through channels that appeared unconnected but were actually part of a single centralised command structure. He began documenting everything, screenshotting real-time operations, copying database entries, building an irrefutable record of the network in action. This was the smoking gun he had been looking for, proof that modern society was being manipulated by invisible forces operating on a scale that dwarfed anything in history. But as he prepared to copy the most damaging files to his secure storage devices, Dorian noticed something that made his blood freeze. The documents he was accessing contained more than just information. They contained active code that was executing on his system every time he opened a file. He ran an immediate diagnostic and discovered the horrifying truth. Every document in the vault was embedded with sophisticated tracking malware. Not only did the system know exactly what he had accessed, it had been installing backdoors and surveillance tools on his equipment from the moment he had first breached their security. His air-gapped computers weren't air-gapped anymore. His encrypted storage devices were compromised. His Faraday cages were useless against software that was already inside his systems. But the worst revelation was yet to come. As he traced the malware's network connections, Dorian realised that his entire investigation had been orchestrated from the beginning. The original files he had discovered in the Masonic Lodge archive. They had been placed there deliberately, designed to attract someone with his specific skill set and psychological profile. The research trails he had followed, the connections he had discovered, the patterns he had uncovered, all of it had been a carefully constructed puzzle, leading him step by step to this moment. He hadn't been investigating the Three Masons, he had been recruited by them. The recruitment wasn't complete yet. According to the protocols he found in his own file, the final step required a conscious choice. He could accept integration into their network, becoming a willing participant in the great work, or he could face the consequences of possessing knowledge that wasn't meant for outsiders. As if summoned by his thoughts, a new message appeared on his screen. Dorian, you have seen behind the veil. There are only two paths forward. Choose wisely. Below the message were two links. The first was labelled integration. The second was labelled termination. Dorian stared at the screen, his mind racing through the implications of everything he had discovered. The Three Masons weren't the villains in this story, at least not from their perspective. They saw themselves as shepherds of human civilization, guiding society toward what they believed was a better future. The manipulation, the control, the systematic shaping of human consciousness, all of it was presented as necessary stewardship of a species too chaotic and self-destructive to govern itself effectively. But Dorian couldn't shake the image of humanity as a vast puppet show, with invisible hands pulling strings that the puppets couldn't even see. Was guided evolution really better than free will? Was managed consciousness preferable to authentic chaos? The choice before him wasn't just about his own survival. It was about what kind of world he wanted to live in, and what kind of person he wanted to be within that world. As he reached for his mouse to make his selection, Dorian heard something that made his blood run cold. Sirens in the distance, growing closer. Time was up. The sound of footsteps in the tunnel above was unmistakable. Heavy boots, moving with military precision, getting closer with each passing second. Dorian's hands flew across his keyboard as he initiated emergency protocols, wiping drives, destroying evidence, preparing for what he now realized was inevitable. The sirens had been a psychological prompt designed to create urgency and force a hasty decision. The real trap was much more elegant than simple law enforcement intervention. As Dorian frantically tried to secure his data, he discovered that his internet connection had been severed, not blocked, completely terminated at the infrastructure level. His backup satellite connections were jammed. His cellular network showed full signal strength but couldn't establish data connections. Even his emergency radio beacon was transmitting into empty air, its signals absorbed by sophisticated countermeasures he couldn't detect, but could feel pressing in around him like invisible walls. The isolation was complete and professional. Whoever was coming for him had surrounded him not just physically, but digitally, cutting off every possible avenue of communication or escape. But Dorian had one final card to play. Before establishing his underground command center, he had prepared a dead man's switch, an automated system that would release his entire archive if he failed to check in within a specific time window. The system was housed on a server cluster in Eastern Europe, completely disconnected from his current location and impossible to trace back to him through conventional means. At least that's what he had believed. As he tried to access the dead man's switch, Dorian discovered that it too had been compromised. The activation codes had been changed, the server locations had been altered, and his backup authentication systems had been systematically disabled. Somehow they had anticipated and countered even his most paranoid contingency plans. The footsteps stopped directly above his hiding place. In the silence that followed, Dorian finally understood the true nature of the trap. He hadn't just been recruited, he had been studied, analysed, and predicted with mechanical precision. Every move he had made, every precaution he had taken, every paranoid contingency he had prepared, had been anticipated and accounted for. His investigation hadn't been a threat to their operations. It had been a demonstration of their capabilities. A voice echoed down from the tunnel above, calm and professional. "Mr. Cade, we need to talk." Dorian looked around his underground command center. The sophisticated equipment, the military-grade security measures, the careful preparations that had taken weeks to implement. All of it was useless now. He had been allowed to build this fortress so that they could demonstrate how easily it could be bypassed. The voice continued, "Your research has been impressive. Your skills are exactly what we've been looking for. But the recruitment process needs to be completed according to protocol." Protocol. Everything with them was protocol, systematic and methodical. Even rebellion had to follow their rules, serve their purposes, advance their agenda. As the first figures began descending into his underground sanctuary, Dorian made one final desperate attempt to access his archive. If he could just upload something, anything, to prove that the three Masons were real and active, maybe someone else would continue the investigation. But his screens had already gone dark. His equipment was shutting down in sequence, responding to override commands that bypassed every security system he had installed. They weren't just capturing him, they were demonstrating complete dominance over his digital domain. The lead figure removed their helmet, revealing a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a patient smile. She looked more like a librarian than a Black Ops operative. but her presence commanded the attention of everyone in the room. "Hello, Dorian," she said warmly. "My name is Dr. Ellen Drew, and I represent the contemporary stewards of the great work. You've impressed us greatly with your research, but I'm afraid you've also created a security situation that needs to be resolved." Dorian found his voice. "You mean eliminated?" Dr. Drew shook her head. "Integration, actually. Your psychological profile suggests you'd be much more valuable as a willing participant than as a cautionary tale. The choice is still yours, but I should mention that the termination option from earlier was never really on the table. We've invested too much in your development to waste that potential." As she spoke, Dorian realised that even his moment of apparent choice had been an illusion. The integration process had already begun the moment he first accessed their files. Every revelation, every discovery, every moment of apparent rebellion had been carefully orchestrated to bring him to this point. He wasn't being recruited, he was being harvested. Dr. Drew gestured to the equipment surrounding them. "All of this will be preserved, of course. Your research will continue, but with proper resources and institutional support. The Three Masons' work is too important to be left to individual initiative, no matter how talented." Dorian stared at the woman who held his future in her hands. "And if I refuse?" "Then you'll be experiencing a very realistic simulation of refusal, while your consciousness is gradually adjusted to accept integration. We've found that the illusion of choice makes the process more comfortable for everyone involved. The trap was perfect because it had no exit. Resistance would be futile because resistance was part of the design. Even this conversation, even his growing horror at the situation, was probably being factored into some psychological algorithm designed to optimize his eventual compliance." As the implication sank in, Dorian felt something break inside him. Not his spirit, but his attachment to the idea that any of this had ever been real. His investigation, his discoveries, his moment of revelation, all of it had been a carefully crafted performance designed to transform him into whatever they needed him to become. The Three Masons weren't just controlling society, they were controlling him. And the most terrifying part was that he was beginning to understand why. 6 months after Dorian Cade disappeared from his apartment in the middle of the night, fragments of his research began surfacing on obscure internet forums. Anonymous uploads appeared on file-sharing networks, containing encrypted archives that told a story of conspiracy and control spanning 3 centuries. The uploads were sporadic and seemingly random. A few documents here, some analysis there, portions of what appeared to be a larger investigation into something called the Three Masons. The files generated intense discussion in certain corners of the internet. Conspiracy theorists, digital privacy advocates, and researchers into esoteric history all found elements that resonated with their particular interests. But the fragments raised more questions than they answered. The documentation was sophisticated enough to suggest serious research, but incomplete enough to prevent any definitive conclusions. The historical elements were intriguingly plausible, but unverifiable through conventional sources. The contemporary analysis contained insights into media manipulation and social control that seemed prescient, but could easily be dismissed as paranoid speculation. Some investigators tried to trace the uploads back to their source, but the digital trails led nowhere. The files appeared and disappeared from servers around the world, uploaded by anonymous accounts that vanished as quickly as they had been created. Whoever was releasing this information had sophisticated technical capabilities and an intimate understanding of how to remain invisible in the digital landscape. The mystery deepened when researchers noticed that the archive fragments contained embedded metadata, hidden signatures that seemed to reference additional materials that had never been released. The signatures suggested that what they were seeing was only a small portion of a much larger collection of evidence. But where was the rest of the archive? And who was controlling its release? Theories proliferated across discussion forums and social media platforms. Some believed that Dorian Cade had been silenced by the very forces he was investigating, and that the leaked materials were being released by automated systems he had established as insurance. Others suggested that the entire thing was an elaborate alternate reality game, designed to blur the lines between fiction and reality. A few researchers claimed to have identified patterns in the release schedule that aligned with significant political events or cultural developments. The fragments seemed to appear at moments when they would have maximum relevance to current affairs, as if someone was curating their release to maximise impact. But perhaps the most unsettling theory was that the leaks were intentional, not the work of a whistleblower or an automated system, but a deliberate information campaign designed to achieve some larger purpose. If the three Masons really existed, and if they really controlled information systems as thoroughly as the document suggested, then wouldn't they also control the narrative of their own exposure? Late-night researchers who delved too deeply into the Cade archive reported strange experiences, computer glitches that seemed too targeted to be random, internet searches that returned results that disappeared when accessed again, social media algorithms that seemed to actively suppress discussion of certain topics. Some claimed to have received anonymous messages warning them away from the investigation. Others reported that their research was being monitored by unknown parties. A few simply stopped posting one day, their accounts going silent without explanation. The pattern was subtle but consistent. Those who got closest to understanding the true scope of Dorian's discoveries seemed to encounter obstacles that discouraged further research. Nothing dramatic, nothing that couldn't be explained by coincidence or technical malfunction. But the cumulative effect was to ensure that the investigation never reached critical mass. And so the mystery of Dorian Cade and the three Masons remained unsolved, existing in the liminal space between truth and fiction, between revelation and misdirection. The fragments continued to circulate, generating discussion and debate, but never quite coalescing into anything that could definitively prove or disprove the central claims. The most dedicated researchers began to notice something peculiar about their own investigations. The deeper they dug, the more they found themselves questioning not just the truth of Dorian's discoveries, but the nature of truth itself. If information could be so thoroughly controlled and manipulated, how could anyone be certain that their own thoughts and conclusions were authentic? One researcher, posting under the username Digital Veil, claimed to have reconstructed portions of Dorian's methodology and arrived at similar conclusions about media manipulation and social control. But when other investigators tried to verify the research, they found that the evidence cited by Digital Veil led to websites that no longer existed, documents that had been removed from archives, and source materials that seemed to vanish whenever anyone tried to access them independently. Was Digital Veil continuing Dorian's work? Or was Digital Veil part of the very system Dorian had claimed to expose? The question became even more complex when Digital Veil began posting increasingly sophisticated analysis that seemed to predict social and political developments with uncanny accuracy. The posts described how specific news events would unfold, how public opinion would shift in response to carefully crafted messaging campaigns, and how seemingly unrelated cultural phenomena were actually coordinated elements of larger influence operations. And the predictions kept coming true. But rather than proving the existence of the Three Masons conspiracy, Digital Veil's accurate predictions only deepened the mystery. Were they based on genuine insider knowledge of how the system operated, or were they simply the result of careful observation of existing patterns? Was Digital Veil exposing the conspiracy or participating in it? The final post from Digital Veil came exactly 1 year after Dorian Cade's disappearance. It consisted of a single image, the three interlocked triangles that had started Dorian's investigation, accompanied by a brief message. The research continues. The watchers become the watched. The hunters become the hunted. Truth is not a destination but a journey, and some journeys are designed to change the traveller more than the destination. Dorian understood this in the end. He chose integration not because he was forced to, but because he realised that the only way to truly oppose the system was to understand it from within. The Three Masons were never the enemy. They were teachers, waiting for students ready to learn the hardest lesson of all. Power is not something you take. Power is something you become. The archive is complete, the circle is closed, the great work continues. DK. The message sparked intense debate across conspiracy forums and research communities. Was this really from Dorian Cade, suggesting that he had willingly joined the organisation he had been investigating? Was it a fake message designed to discredit his research? Or was it something more subtle, a coded communication from someone operating deep within the system Dorian had tried to expose? No one could agree on the interpretation, and perhaps that was the point. The message was designed to be ambiguous, to raise questions rather than answer them, to ensure that the investigation would continue but never reach a definitive conclusion. In the months that followed, the Dorian Cade archive gradually faded from active discussion. New conspiracy theories emerged to capture the attention of digital investigators. New mysteries arose to challenge those who sought hidden truths. The Three Masons, if they existed, returned to the shadows where they had always operated most effectively. But for those who had followed the investigation closely, something had changed. They found themselves looking at the world differently, noticing patterns they had never seen before, questioning assumptions they had never thought to examine. They began to see the invisible architecture of influence that shaped their daily lives, even if they couldn't prove its existence to others. Some researchers reported that they had begun to incorporate elements of the doctrine of quiet influence into their own work, not to manipulate others, but to better understand how they themselves were being manipulated. They studied the psychological techniques described in Dorian's files, the linguistic frameworks, the symbolic systems, the methodologies for shaping human consciousness. A few claim to have achieved a kind of immunity to mass manipulation through this understanding. They described a state of hyper-awareness where they could observe the influence systems operating around them without being affected by them. They called it seeing through the veil. But others wondered if this supposed immunity was itself an illusion, if the system was sophisticated enough to make people believe they had escaped its influence, while actually drawing them deeper into its web. After all, what better way to control someone than to convince them they couldn't be controlled? The question that haunted all serious researchers into the Dorian Cade mystery was whether the investigation had revealed the truth about hidden systems of control, or whether it had been a demonstration of those systems in action. Had they uncovered a conspiracy, or had they been recruited into one? Perhaps the most unsettling possibility was that there was no meaningful difference between the two options. The final entry in what researchers believed to be Dorian's original archive was a single text file, uploaded anonymously to a dozen different platforms simultaneously. It contained no metadata, no digital signatures, no clues about its origin. The message was brief but haunting. If you are reading this, you have already been chosen. The investigation never ends. It only changes investigators. Welcome to the great work. Your orientation will begin shortly. Below the message was a simple instruction. Look around you. Really look. The signs are everywhere, once you know how to see them. And indeed, those who followed the instruction began to notice things. Symbols in corporate logos that matched patterns from the historical documents. Linguistic structures in news broadcasts that aligned with psychological manipulation frameworks. Social media algorithms that seemed to nudge users towards specific conclusions without their awareness. The Three Masons weren't hiding in the shadows. They were hiding in plain sight, their influence so thoroughly woven into the fabric of modern society that it had become invisible through ubiquity. They didn't need to silence investigators because they had created a world where the truth was indistinguishable from elaborate fiction. And perhaps that was the most elegant control system of all. A reality so thoroughly constructed that even those who glimpsed behind the veil couldn't be certain whether they had discovered the truth or been recruited to perpetuate a more sophisticated illusion. The Three Masons, whether real or imagined, ancient or contemporary, had achieved something unprecedented in human history. They had made the question of their existence irrelevant. In a world where information could be infinitely manipulated and human consciousness systematically shaped, the distinction between reality and carefully crafted narrative had ceased to matter. What mattered was the system itself, the vast, invisible architecture of influence that operated according to principles established centuries ago by three men whose names had been deliberately erased from history. They had created not just a secret society, but a new form of reality, one where truth was not discovered but constructed, where power was not seized but evolved, and where the ultimate conspiracy was the idea that conspiracies were necessary at all. In the end, Dorian Cade's investigation had revealed something far more profound than evidence of historical manipulation or contemporary control systems. It had revealed the fundamental malleability of human consciousness and the terrifying possibility that reality itself was subject to editing by those who understood the deeper mechanics of perception and belief. The three were not just in the past, they were here now, watching, guiding, shaping the very thoughts that their observers used to contemplate their existence. They had transcended the crude mechanics of conspiracy to achieve something approaching digital godhood, the power to define reality itself. And the most beautiful part of their design was that it didn't matter whether anyone believed in them or not. The system they had created was self-sustaining, self-correcting, and ultimately inescapable. The investigation was over. The great work continued. And somewhere in the space between digital shadows and physical reality, Dorian Cade smiled and began planning his next recruitment.